Jumbo Africa. It's a Friday here on the Newsroom. I'm Elvis Preslin. We'll be with you until 12 o'clock today. Well, there's lots of things happening, especially just over our borders here in Zimbabwe, Kendall. As you know, Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe sacked his deputy president and former protege on Monday and expelling him from the ruling ZANU-PF party on Wednesday.
And on this day, we'll ask you this particular question. What is your assessment of the situation in Zimbabwe?
Well, that's what we're asking you. Let us know on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom. This one coming in from Siafana says, that country is out of order, now including their president, #Zimbabwe.
Michael says, nothing much has changed from our neighbors. Uncle Bob is still going strong and looks as if he's going to turn 100 years old while still in power. And Grace Mugabe is bulldozing everyone to cement her place as second in command and eventually take over. We are watching, says Michael.
Well, we'll keep on watching, and that's our emphasis for today on the issues in Zimbabwe. But also at home, the Hawks now are investigating whether charges should be laid against investigative journalist Jacques Pauw.
Well,
now,
exactly.
you know that the State Security Agency said that they did lay some charges.
Yes, we know that. Very interesting. Like, apparently for contravening certain sections of the Intelligence Act with his book, The President's Keeper. We've got two options for you in this poll for today. We want to find out from you, what cases should the Hawks be investigating?
Gupta leaks or Jacques Pauw? Well, we have 193 votes in, Kendall. 88% are suggesting that the Gupta leak should be investigated, and only 12%. I don't know who is that 12% that believes that Jacques Pauw should be investigated.
Could be the SSA. We don't know. Mystic Man El Malati says it's considered dangerous to be right when government and its leaders are wrong.
Gadani says the Hawks will do anything not to spend time investigating the real criminals. Even investigating a missing cat from the alley, they will do. Well, those are your comments, are not the views of the SABC, but you can keep them coming throughout the day. We'll read them as we continue. But there's also a sporting question. It's a big day for Bafana Bafana tonight.
Yes, it's the first of a double header, and up against Senegal, Sadio Mane is going to be playing, and Coup is still doubtful. But we want to find out from you, what are your score predictions for the Bafana Bafana versus Senegal World Cup qualifier tonight?
Will it be a Batman-Robin phenomenon? Well, there you see the mask on Kune. Will he be playing? That's another question.
Nazim Grootboom says, my prediction is Bafana Bafana 3, Senegal 1.
And Tokozo says, Bafana Bafana 2, Senegal 1. I feel this game, we're going to win. Well, that's what we all hope for in Tokozo, because remember, if we draw or we lose, it's out. It's all out.
All those kudos.
But that's what we got for you. Let's get down to business and take a look at your news headlines. Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba has deferred any inquiries to the presidency as he refuses to weigh in on reports that President Jacob Zuma could announce free higher education for all in the country. As allegations in the Eskom saga intensify, former PRASA CEO Lucky Montana says he was introduced to the Gupta family by the then Transport Minister Ben Martins. And the Hawks say they are investigating whether charges should be laid against investigative journalist Jacques Pauw. Those are your headlines, but before we get into the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front.
Elvis, it's a massive weekend. The Springboks will be playing Ram Slam T20 starts, but bigger than that, Bafana Bafana up against a massive, massive challenge up against Senegal. They're going to have the entire, the best team that Senegal can put forward is going to be on that pitch in Polokwane. So good morning to you. This is what we've got for you in the sports today.
Tyson looks like he's going to struggle for this one, and we're not going to take any chances.
Bafana Bafana's injury woes get worse, as it seems likely that the defense might have to do without captain Thulani Hlatshwayo, who could be out with an injury to his toe. And Springbok coach Alistair Coetzee brings back controversial centre Damien Dayende to his starting lineup as one of the 3 changes to the side to play Ireland on the weekend.
When I opened my iPad and I read that letter from Sir Sebastian Coe and inviting me and congratulating me on this reward, I was out of this world, really. I couldn't believe it.
And Hans Botha, coach of South African 400-meter world record holder, Olympic champion and world champion Wade van Niekerk, has been named 2017 Coach of the Year by the International Association of Athletics Federations.
Gardner on a charge, but nobody can stop the world record holder. Van Niekerk takes the gold.
Well, there it is. Hans Botha, Wade van Niekerk's coach, and IWF reckons she is the Coach of the Year. All this and more a little later at about 10:40. Do stay with Elvis as he's got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this hour. The Finance Minister, Malusi Gigaba, says international investors should not be worried about whether or not the ANC elective conference will take place in December, as this is something that will happen. He was speaking from New York, where he is leading an investor roadshow.
I think one of the very interesting questions which I have found in the conversation is not only questions about policies that will emanate from the conference or who will be elected at the conference, because people do understand that there is a contestation and the ANC conference will elect a leader. But an intriguing question for me, which has been raised by investors, is whether the ANC conference is going to take place or not, given some of the challenges that have been experienced in some of the provincial and regional conferences across the country. We have assured them that the conference is going to take place. It is a conference of branches, and the audit of branches has been concluded. We therefore are confident that the conference is going to go ahead, and they need to take leave from the signals which have been sent in terms of policy by the National Policy Conference in July. And so to the extent that we can, we are very confident that the conference will take place, a new leadership will be elected, and the policy signals have been sent by the policy conference.
Concerns are mounting that the country might face further ratings downgrades, with Moody's currently in South Africa ahead of a possible announcement before the end of the year. Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago is among the leadership of a South African business and government delegation speaking to investors as part of a 5-city, 4-country roadshow.
Well, if South Africa gets downgraded, that would mean that we will now have less than 2 investment grade ratings in terms of our domestic currency denominated debt. That would mean that we fall out of some of the key bond indices, and a lot of the investors that we have been talking about here are invested in South Africa. They are tracking this bond index. The World Government Bond Index is the most important one. If we fall out of that bond index, it means that some of these investors will have to liquidate their positions in South Africa. So if they do that and the currency depreciates, you might have rising inflation, and but at the same time, we might be attracting other forms of investment. That investment is going to be investment of a speculative nature, which means that South Africa is going to be faced with more volatile capital flows than we had seen in the past.
Now, South Africa might end up with a government that is as evil as the apartheid regime if the civil society doesn't keep the ANC government in check. Now, this is according to investigative journalist and author Jacques Pauw. He was speaking at another launch of his controversial and best-selling book, The President's Keepers, in Pretoria last night.
An explosive expose. From the manipulation of law enforcement agencies, the purging of those opposing state capture, and the looting of state coffers, The President's Keepers author also accuses President Jacob Zuma of tax evasion.
If Jacob Zuma's only income has been his presidential salary since May 2009, why would he not open his tax affairs for us to have a look at?
The Revenue Service accused Pauw of contravening tax laws for publishing President Jacob Zuma's tax affairs. The State Security Agency also accused him of contravening the Intelligence Service Act. But Pauw denied reports that criminal charges had been laid against him.
The spokesperson of the State Security Agency said that they laid a charge against me. The Hawk said, no, it's not a charge, it's only a complaint.
Former Finance Minister also graced the event. he signed some copies of the president's keepers.
What we do need in South Africa at the moment is more Jacques Pauws in government, in civil society, in business, in the labor movement, so that we can bring the truth out. We can show the minority of people who are bringing this country to its knees that the majority don't want that.
Jacques Pauw also denied allegations that he had a racist agenda by publishing the president's keepers. This as he also kept the apartheid government in check back then. The President's Keepers is currently one of the best-selling books both locally and internationally. Offenses Timo, SABC News, Brooklyn, Pretoria.
Well, from Jacques Pauw to our poll today that we're conducting, because we want to know from you, what do you think? What should the Hawks, what sort of cases should the Hawks be focusing on? Well, thus far, we have 259 votes in. 88% are suggesting that we should, or the Hawks should, look at the Gupta leaks, and only 12% saying that Jacques Pauw should be investigated. Well, this is what you are telling us thus far, but you're also tweeting us on the matter. Let's take a quick look. This one coming in from Michael Big M says, justice is blind. The last I checked, so the Hawks should focus on any case that's of interest. It doesn't matter if it's the Gupta leaks or Jacques Pauw, because it's as if we are siding with Jacques Pauw now. If the Hawks have something on him, then they must pay him a visit. And the question should be, Michael, why not the Gupta leaks, which is a year old now, 12 months. But moving on, we come back to some of your comments a little bit later. Deputy Public Enterprises Minister Ben Martins has described suspended Eskom Head of Legal Services, Suzanne Daniels, as a liar. Now, this follows revelations made by Daniels before the parliamentary probe into state capture and maladministration at Eskom. Daniels alleged that Martins tried to manipulate the court case against the ousted Eskom CEO Brian Molefe. She said she held a meeting with the Deputy Minister, AJ Gupta, Duduzane Zuma, and a Chinese lady through a Gupta associate, Salim Issa. Or Essa, rather. Now, Daniels told Parliament that the Gupta family wanted to know the progress on the Molefe court case. Martins has denied attending the meeting in question.
The meeting, the alleged phantom coffee tea party meeting that was spoken about, I have not been party to such a meeting. One of the first occasions when I met the Gupta brothers was after my appointment as the Deputy Minister of Public Enterprises. Not this term, around 2013.
Continuing into the affairs of Eskom in Parliament. Meanwhile, President Jacob Zuma has expressed concern about the Black Monday March. During his annual NCOP address, he described the display of symbols of racism during that march as disgusting. The president also weighed in on the social grant payout debacle.
This means that some compatriots yearn for the past in which black people were subjected and treated as pariahs in the land of their birth. This conduct is not good, shocking, and grossly insensitive. The Interministerial Committee on Comprehensive Social Security is seized with the matter and will assist the Department of Social Development to find workable solutions within the timeframes set to ensure that the beneficiaries of social grants do not suffer.
An interpreter broke down and had to be rushed out of the Life Esidimeni arbitrations during the testimony of a family member. Now this, as families continue to give emotional accounts of their experiences. 141 patients died after being moved into the care of unlicensed NGOs. The hearings, led by retired Judge Dikgang Mosoneke, are seeking answers and redress.
Luleka Khunjwa admitted her sister Maureen to Life Esidimeni facility in Transfrontier in 1975. Just months after being transferred to Takalani home in Soweto, her condition deteriorated.
Uhleli eRandfontein 41 years.
She stayed at Transfrontier for 41 years. And she was okay, there was no problem.
Uye eTakalani. Uhleli 7 months. And she died.
She went to Takalani. She only stayed for 7 months and she died thereafter.
So engakusho nje ukuthi bambulele, finish and clear.
All I can say is that they have murdered her.
Before that, Maureen was in and out of hospital because Takalani had no doctors.
Mangifika ngathuka kabi.
When I arrived there, I was very shocked.
Weak.
She was very weak. She could not stand on her own.
Nyambamba ngimncikisa emawindweni lawa la eTakalani.
Because I was holding him against the windows there at Takalani because she was very weak.
Ngamncikisa ngimbalansisa ukuthi angawi.
I made her to balance so that she could not fall.
Anam Tembu's sister, Busisiwe Shabalala, died at the Cullinan Care and Rehabilitation Center from starvation and cold. She found Busisiwe's naked body on the floor, covered with just a cloth.
Even when I sit down and eat, I always think of her if she had food or...
Her testimony, too much for the interpreter.
I always...
This woman testified how former Gauteng Health MEC Gedani Mahlangu offered them food parcels after her son's death.
Angizange ngawamkela umnikelo wabo ngizoxolisa nje ukuthi ngikhulume ngalendlela engizokhuluma ngayo ngabatshela ukuthi mabawathathe lawo ma food parcels and shove them where the sun doesn't shine.
I did not accept that, and I'm sorry for the words which I've just used.
A clinical psychologist will be the next to take the stand. She interviewed family members after the death of their loved ones. She's likely to shed more light on the trauma they endured and the emotional and psychological impact of the events. Criselda Lewis, SABC News, in Parktown, Johannesburg.
The new 1 litre from Carling Black Label. Share the ultimate reward.
Sports Live, Saturday and Sundays at 8:30 p.m.
The South African government does not know the whereabouts of the ex-Zimbabwean Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa. That's the word from International Relations and Corporations Minister Maitenekwane Mashabane. Mnangagwa reportedly fled to South Africa after he was fired by President Robert Mugabe earlier this week.
Reports out of Zimbabwe say Mnangagwa fled the country on Tuesday. Details around his whereabouts are still sketchy, but some believe he's already in South Africa. On Wednesday, expelled war veterans threw their weight behind Mnangagwa. SADC's chair, South Africa, says it has no information of his whereabouts.
We have no information about the whereabouts of the former vice president of Zimbabwe.
Back in Zimbabwe, it's business as usual. President Robert Mugabe officiated at the renaming of the airport. The Harare airport will now be called the Robert Mugabe International Airport.
It is indeed a great honor for me, and I'm humbled by this gesture. My government recognizes that air transport is pivotal to the economic growth of our country. While transport in general accelerates the movement of people and goods in a cost-effective way, air transport facilitates and promotes national and regional trade, tourism, investment, and integration.
Meanwhile, the ZANU-PF Politburo on Thursday also expelled Mnangagwa as the party's vice president. Lehana Tsotitsi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe says the route to leadership is long and full of pitfalls and death. Now this, as he accused his fired deputy and former protege of showing impatience in his bid to succeed him. Addressing supporters at the headquarters of ZANU-PF party in Harare, Mugabe accused Emmerson Mnangagwa of consulting witch doctors and prophets as part of a campaign to secure the presidency. Now, for the latest developments on the politics in Zimbabwe, we're joined on the line by our Zimbabwean correspondent, Ifet Musikiwa. A very good morning to you, Ifet, and welcome. Can you tell us what is the latest on the ground?
Good morning, Elvis. I can tell you that this morning, as of last night, the jailed American citizen who's accused of undermining the authority of the president was granted $1,000 bail, and we expect that she'll be released from remand prison anytime this morning. The conditions for her bail is that she has to report twice a week to the CID Department of Police once every Monday and Friday. So we expect that she will walk out of prison anytime this morning. Secondly, on the issue of the vice president, still no clear indication as to where exactly he is. Some reports claim that he left via Mozambique, via Beira, headed for Mozambique. But we have no clear confirmation as to his actual whereabouts. But I can indeed confirm that on Wednesday, when the Politburo met, the Secretary for Information, Simon Kayamoyo, did indicate that the Politburo unanimously expelled him from the party ZANU-PF. And now he's just an ordinary Zimbabwean. He's no longer the vice president of the country. He's no longer the vice president of the ruling party ZANU-PF. Yesterday, President Mugabe officiated at the renaming of the Harare International Airport. And we saw senior government officials being present. Reactions to that is that most of the opposition parties are saying it's a non-event, and once they get hold of power, they will rename it back to Harare International Airport. They say this is just a sign of Mugabe trying to enlarge his dynasty, trying to make sure that everything that is associated with Zimbabwe carries his name forward. So that is the latest on the ground, Elvis.
What are you gathering from the Mnangagwa camp after he fled the country? Is there turmoil?
At the present moment, nothing on the ground that we can really see as to what the Mnangagwa camp is doing. We've been trying to get hold of his spokesperson. He was available on Monday. We could get hold of him. But as of Tuesday and Wednesday, and even up to yesterday, his numbers have not been going through. We understand that they are meeting. We understand that they are trying to strategize and come back into the country. So really, there is nothing on the ground that we can say we have heard from the Mnangagwa camp. Safe to say that reports confirm that he is indeed left the country.
When can we expect an announcement perhaps from the presidency on the new first vice president? And can we expect perhaps the First Lady, Grace Mugabe, to be that one?
On Wednesday, President Mugabe, the rally that was organized on Wednesday was to endorse the First Lady as the next vice president. In response, President Mugabe said he has heard the calls of the youth, he has heard the calls from the 10 provinces, but he said he has to wait for Congress. He has to say it has to be endorsed by Congress. Whatever their concerns, whatever their wishes are, they will all be addressed at Congress. And Congress, as you might be aware, it's less than a month from now. So we might expect the appointment to be done early December when the ZANU-PF Congress does meet and deliberate on the vacancy of the vice president.
Effort, thank you so much for your time and giving us an update there. Effort Musikiwa, rather, he's our Zimbabwean correspondent, giving us an update there. Now, our foreign desk editor, Sophie Mukwena, is in studio with us to give us more in-depth analysis. A very good morning to you, Sophie, and welcome.
Good morning, Elvis.
What do you read from the latest developments in Zimbabwe?
Well, clearly, President Mugabe is still in control, as many indicated earlier this week, and it looks like Vice President Mnangagwa is still on the run, but I know that he's in South Africa. I spoke to his people, some of them, and they promised that they will be ensuring that perhaps we are able to speak to him. But the challenge is that because he is in a foreign country, he has to ensure that he consult with all the stakeholders, because this can lead to a serious diplomatic tensions between South Africa and Zimbabwe. I know South Africa is in a very difficult position right now. We have the Vice President of Zimbabwe. We have Lesotho, former Prime Minister in South Africa. We also have former Vice President of South Sudan, Riek Machar. And I think South Africa is playing safe. But the reality is some or many of Mnangagwa supporters are currently in the country.
It seems like we sound almost like we have a political crash here in South Africa for politicians that fled their countries. But
I don't envy Department of International Relations.
We'll come back further with this discussion, but we want to talk to the Vice President of the MDC, the Movement for Democratic Change, Nelson Chamisa. Very good morning to you, sir, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Now, what is your reaction to the firing of the Zimbabwe's Vice President, Emmerson Mnangagwa?
Well, first things first, the most important point we have to confirm and appreciate is the fact that ZANU-PF is a mafia and gangster party, confirmed by, obviously, the president. It's like an opportunity. It indicates how difficult to be a politician.
Well, it seems like we're losing you there for a while. We're going to get and see if we can get a better line there, Mr. Chamisa, because we'd like to get your thoughts on that. But Sophie, just coming back, it seems like Zimbabwe is really on the edge, because the firing of the deputy who has got links to the military seems to be a very uneven move at this point in time.
That's a perception, but for now, not much has happened in terms of perhaps where one can really say something huge is likely to happen, but you'll never know. Secondly, the leader of the MDC, Morgan Changarai, we spoke to him while was it on Tuesday? He is here in hospital for medical treatment. He indicated that the only way is to go to elections and perhaps let the Zimbabweans decide, and perhaps they must decide whether they want change or they want the same situation. I think for me, it's very difficult whether Emmerson Mnangagwa will be able to change the situation in Zimbabwe, and even going back to reclaim leadership of ZANU-PF. We don't know. You had effort saying that President Mugabe at the rally where they were discussing what needs to happen before, after the Politburo meeting, indicated that the coming Congress will decide in terms of the way forward. And all indications points to the fact that Grace Mugabe, the current leader of the women's movement of ZANU-PF, will definitely be the vice president. Whether she will be the first vice president or the second vice president, maybe Mpoko moving to the position of first vice president, or there's going to be a complete change in the presidency, only President Mugabe being retained, and perhaps some people are thinking that Dr. Sikeramai is a dark horse.
Let me just go back to the Vice President of the MDC, Mr. Nelson Chamisa. Once again, sir, thank you very much. Are you concerned with the growing tensions within the governing party, and are you also worried that it may spill over to the rest of the country?
Indeed, when the ruling party catches a cold, the entire nation sneezes. We are extremely worried. There is too much volatility and fragility within the corridors of ZANU-PF. And ZANU-PF as a party is fragmenting. ZANU-PF as a party is collapsing. And we are afraid that the debris is going to affect and injure ordinary citizens, including other political players and gladiators in the country. It's actually a political tinderbox. We are extremely worried that the fights that are in ZANU-PF between the various political protagonists is going to affect the people. When the elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers always, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, anywhere else in the world.
Are you taking advantage as the opposition of the current situation within ZANU-PF?
Of course, when we have a lion and a leopard fighting, it is to our advantage that we assist the fighting. But of course, when the victor is declared, either a lion or a leopard, we will then take advantage of then finishing off the victor. Because that victor would be so weak. And we are so excited that it's an opportunity for us. As much as we are anxious about what is happening, it is an opportunity that has to be exploited by the opposition coming together, converging, having an alliance, unity of purpose, and creating an alternative narrative in terms of the vision for a new Zimbabwe, so that we rescue not just the people of Zimbabwe, but also we rescue ZANU-PF, which has become not only a threat to the people of Zimbabwe, but also a threat to itself.
Now, in an unusual development, President Robert Mugabe's ruling ZANU-PF party is to hold a special Congress this December ahead of the elections in 2018. Do you think that the president wants to use his Congress, or this Congress, to entrench his family's hold on power and to entrench his dynasty or his family's dynasty?
Well, the so-called Congress is just a facade. Mr. Mugabe is the party. Mr. Mugabe is the organ. Mr. Mugabe is the Congress. Mr. Mugabe is ZANU-PF. So we've had the personalization of the institution and the institutionalization of the person called Robert Gabriel Mugabe. So this whole thing about the Congress is simply a charade. It's simply a replay of what is already choreographed to try and put a veneer of democracy. And in fact, what is clear is that Mr. Mugabe wants to succeed himself successively and successfully. He has done that in the past, and I foresee this happening. But what is so worrying for us is that this whole debate, this whole drama, has nothing to do with resolving the fundamental national questions around the economy, around the politics of the land in terms of governance and human rights, around issues of the social crisis we have in the country, with a lot of the vulnerable groups being subjected to tenure and poverty. So we want congresses to resolve fundamental questions of the day, including the collapsing of the economy, the precipice of the economy. Those are the issues we must be answering, rather than pursuing power and focusing on power without necessarily addressing survival issues.
At the moment, a lot of people are worried that the MDC is severely weakened with your leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, recently hospitalized. Are your supporters being mobilized to register to vote and ensure that you can clamp down? And is there possibility, perhaps, also of an alliance with other groupings to take over power in Zimbabwe?
I can confirm to you that the MDC is very strong. That's why Mr. Mugabe is quaking in his boots. That's why Mr. Mugabe is shaking. That's why ZANU-PF is collapsing. And that is why ZANU-PF is in trouble. Mr. Tsvangirai is out of the hospital. He's recuperating like another human being. He also goes through seasons and moments, but he's out of the danger zone, he's out of the hood. And this is why we are excited that as a party, we are focusing on energizing the base. We are focusing on mobilizing the nation, converging all the alliance partners, all the political parties, all the civic groups, including all veterans, and also the churches within the country to make sure that we march to victory in 2018. There is no better opportunity for the opposition than 2018 because ZANU-PF is absent. There is vacant leadership, and we just need to step in to provide the national leadership. We are energizing, we are mobilizing, and I must say that the party is not hospitalized. The president of the party is not hospitalized, so we are on the rebound.
I thank you so much for your time and giving us an update. Nelson Chamisa from the Movement for Democratic Change. He's the vice president there. Coming back into studio, Sophie Mokoena, now we talked a little bit earlier about the situation. Now you heard what Nelson Chamisa just said. Is that a reality that the MDC is a growing party, a stronger party? Is there that possibility?
Well, truth be told, you know, politicians like to deny facts. MDC currently is struggling because of all the challenges. You remember breakaway parties and all that. And the reality is the opposition in Zimbabwe is very fragmented. I can't see them really being able to capitalize on this situation. It would have been better if they were united because elections are just around the corner. But let's wait and see. Perhaps Morgan Tsvangirai will be able to mobilize the opposition and also some people to support him, and he can do better during the elections next year. But currently, it is very difficult. You'll recall that currently we have so many presidential candidates. When are they going to agree and perhaps put one candidate and rally behind one candidate? Let's wait and see. I spoke to one leader of a youth party, Viva Party from Zimbabwe. He was saying the youth must take a lead. And the two leaders, Morgan Tsvangirai and Mugabe, cannot continue to lead Zimbabwe, and they are going to mobilize young people. A similar situation like South Africa, where you have a young party, most members there being young people led by Julius Malema. They are hoping to set up something like that. It is going to divide the opposition further.
Now, we talked about earlier about the Congress, which is now, it seems like it was called very early. What do you make of this Congress, and will it resolve the issues that we currently have in Zimbabwe? And Grace Mugabe, will she be named? I
agree with Chamisa. I mean, President Mugabe is in control of ZANU-PF. Obvious, the Congress will be a Congress of the faction, and things will go his way. And perhaps, who knows, indeed, Grace Mugabe will be vice president. But the question is, will she be elected first vice president or second vice president?
Well, there you have it. That's where we're going to end the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us here in studio and giving us an update on the latest analysis on the story, developing story in Zimbabwe. We still don't know where the fired deputy president is. We'll find out. We'll bring you more on that. But let's now go to our picture of the day. It comes from Women in Athletics. Wow, wow, wow. Tani Ans, she was named the IAAF Coach of the Year. Congratulations and thank to you for all your contributions to athletics. Hashtag celebrate excellence. Hashtag women in sports, women in athletics. There she is, Tani Ans. Well, I tell you, she's the coach of Wade van Niekerk. There's he with her on the track there. You can see she's putting on his shoe, it looks like it. Is he? Maybe positioning it. But the comment of the day comes from our very own Lulu Gabu. It says, testimonies in Parliament's Eskom inquiry seems to have opened up a Pandora's box, provoking accusations and counter-accusations on the outside. Public Enterprises DP Ben Martins explaining today how he met the Guptas is now disputed by the former PRASA CEO, Lucky Montana. More drama coming out of that. We'll also bring you an update on that story in Parliament today. In our courts, we start off here in Johannesburg. A former boarding master at Johannesburg's Parktown Boys High School in Johannesburg, accused of sexual offences against learners, will appear in the city's High Court today. The charges relate to allegations that the man who was also a water polo coach, sexually assaulted at least 20 male pupils and raped one at the school. The accused may not be named due to the nature of the charges. His case was postponed to today to allow him to secure funds for his defense. The trial date is due to be scheduled. That's only one of the court cases happening around the country, but we'll keep you up to date with all these developments. We'll now take a break, but when we return, there's more for you. We're still honing on the issues in Zimbabwe and taking focal point into that. We're staying with the political situation in Zimbabwe, and of course we're asking you a question in relation to that. I wonder if we can just put up the question again to remind you of what we're asking you this morning, because it's a worrying situation, and we'd like to get your assessment of the current situation in Zimbabwe, politically as well as otherwise. I'd like to find out from you. Let us know on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom, as well as on the Facebook page. This one coming from Kenneth Malachi that says, President Gabriel is too old to run Zimbabwe. I guess he's trying to take the country with him to the grave. Mangete says, well, good for us Zimbabweans. If ZANU-PF is crumbling, let all these corrupt elders pass on and we will rebuild. Matabisi says, all I can say is no hope for the country. Well, those are your thoughts. You can keep them coming. We'll read them as we continue, but we're staying with the political situation in Zimbabwe. Human Rights Watch Southern Africa Director Dewa Mavinga is with us in studio. Very good morning to you, sir, and welcome.
Morning, Elvis. Thank you.
Your reaction to, first and foremost, the firing of the Deputy President of Zimbabwe and the situation in Zimbabwe in general?
It was inevitable. If you look at ZANU-PF and how over the years, the last 37 years, President Mugabe has concentrated power in himself. It means that he is more powerful than ZANU-PF and is more powerful than the government in terms of the authority that he vests in himself. So he could do virtually anything. It was coming because Mugabe would not want anyone to talk of succession because he prefers to die in office. So this is why he went after Mnangagwa. He is not the first deputy to be fired. In December 2014, we had Joyce Mujuru also fired because it was clear that everyone was now talking of the post-Mugabe era. But at 93, turning 94 in February, Mugabe wants to be the candidate for ZANU-PF going forward. And this is why he is getting rid of any potential successor. But the challenge is that, look, Mugabe is also involved the security forces in politics and in civilian affairs, and that raises a danger because the deputy Mnangagwa had strong connections with the army. And this is why there is this tension now, because a number in the army are not happy with the idea of a Mugabe dynasty, where his wife Grace is now tipped to take over. All the ZANU-PF provinces have endorsed Grace Mugabe to be the deputy president and then eventually to take over from Mugabe after elections. So this is where we are now.
Could this lead to political instability in the country?
Absolutely. But what we also need to know is that Mugabe controls ZANU-PF not necessarily from party structures, but through state institutions. You know, he controls, especially the security forces, the intelligence, the police. And therefore, for as long as he can control those structures, then there is unlikely to be, you know, tension. But the moment he steps down, there is no guarantee that Grace Mugabe would last a minute in power without the support and backing of her husband.
Could she become the deputy president or even president, and does the constitution allow it?
She could very well become the deputy president because the ZANU-PF constitution vests all the power in Mugabe to make those appointments. So I agree with what the MDC Deputy President Chamisa said earlier, that really the extraordinary Congress is just for show because Mugabe decides. So it could happen. But in terms of the country constitution, at the moment, if anything happens to Mugabe, then the deputy president, who is there reporting power, takes over until ZANU-PF appoints a substantive president. So this is again likely to be Grace, because now she controls party structures through the expulsion of members of ZANU-PF who are critical of Mugabe's position and trajectory towards a Mugabe dynasty.
Now, the years that followed the land grabs that saw Zimbabweans endure the country's worst famine in 60 years, while human rights accuse ZANU-PF, of course, of using starvation as a tool for regime change and support among Zimbabweans. Is this still the case in Zimbabwe? Famine?
Yes. Over a quarter of the Zimbabwean population depends on food aid. The agriculture sector, which was the backbone for Zimbabwe, is virtually collapsed. Those who were supposedly, the black majority were supposedly given land, have not been able to utilize land. There is a massive cash crisis in Zimbabwe. The multi-currency system is not working. There is no access to the US dollars. Zimbabwe has been unable to explore other currencies, including the South African rand. So there is a huge crisis that is there, which Mugabe is exploiting to then say people should then have handouts, food aid given on a partisan basis, on the basis that one would then support ZANU-PF or vote for ZANU-PF. So it is happening, but also we need to know that ZANU-PF has also used violence. In 2008, over 200 MDC supporters were killed by ZANU-PF supporters, by members of the security forces loyal to Mugabe. So this is what is happening in Zimbabwe.
Is it your sense, though, that other African countries, the SADC region, perhaps, are doing enough to quell the political as well as the human rights situation in Zimbabwe?
Certainly not enough. Within the Southern African Development Community, we have Botswana speaking out, but not as powerful as others. We would have loved to have, for example, South Africa being the regional economic and political powerhouse, and also being the recipient of the problems coming from Zimbabwe in terms of an influx of refugees and asylum seekers from Zimbabwe. We would have wanted South Africa to speak out more strongly so that there is a resolution of the political situation in Zimbabwe, so that Zimbabweans do not have to flock to South Africa. But South Africa has not been forthcoming. The leadership in the governing ANC party have tended and seemed to be supportive of ZANU-PF in the sense that they are sister liberation movements. So that is a disappointment.
In the current highly polarized environment, what are some of the biggest challenges that Zimbabweans face ahead of the elections 2018?
Well, the biggest challenge is that nothing has really changed in terms of electoral reforms. The partisan and politicized state institutions, including the Electoral Commission, that are partisan towards ZANU-PF, are in charge. The same army generals that were there in 2008 and responsible for violence remain in charge. Mugabe remains the candidate. So the environment remains uneven and steeped in favor of ZANU-PF. The opposition groups are calling for people to register to vote in their numbers. But the big challenge remains an uneven electoral field, which is controlled by ZANU-PF, and therefore which makes it very difficult to project and look at a credible, free and fair election in 2018.
If you had to describe the Zimbabwean humanitarian situation in a sentence, what would it be?
It is dire. the health crisis is there. The government is on autopilot. There is no priority. They are talking about, you know, the unveiling of a new airport, naming it after Robert Gabriel Mugabe, but at the cost of $500,000 US. But hospitals have no basic medication. Painkillers, you know, are not there in central hospitals in Zimbabwe. So the situation is dire, and the government is not focused. The only focus now, everyone is talking about succession, about Mugabe expelling this one and that one, and not focusing on reviving the economy and getting Zimbabwe to work again.
Dewa, I thank you so much for joining us here in studio.
Thanks, Elvis.
That was Dewa Mavinga. He is, of course, Human Rights Watch Southern Africa Director here in studio with us. What do you make of that? The situation in Zimbabwe, I would like to get your assessment on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom as well as on the Facebook page. Are you concerned? This is our next door neighbor. We need to be concerned. Are you? Let's take a look at what you are telling me on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom as well as on the Facebook page. This one says, I don't say that Mugabe must give Zimbabwe to Western countries, but he must step down. It's enough of him now, says Nazim Khrodbom. Brigo Brick says, the situation is the same. It's all about power and tribalism, and South Africa is next in line. Really? Brigo Bricks? Mahafa Noel says, I wonder what SADC is doing about the situation in Zimbabwe. Well, that's a question there from Mahafa Noah. You can keep them coming and we'll read them as we continue. But right now, it's getting hot in here. Is it hot out there? Let's find out from the weatherman.
It is 5 p.m. Central African Time, broadcasting live from Johannesburg. This is PM News. Mugabe is wanted in South Africa on a charge of assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm. Mugabe allegedly assaulted local model Gabriela Engels with an extension cord.
If the minister has granted the First Lady diplomatic immunity, then it then means that she will not be prosecuted.
There will now be 16 countries that form part of SADC. The Comoros was added as a member state during this summit. New Zealand rugby great Sir Colin Meads has passed away at the age of 81 following the battle with the pancreatic cancer. In 1999, Meads was named New Zealand's greatest rugby player of the 20th century. This year, a bronze statue of Meads was unveiled in his hometown of Tekuti.
Stay tuned to PM News for all your news updates every Saturday and Sunday from 1500 hours.
A meteorite hit the Earth 2 million years ago, creating an enormous impact of crater, about 10 kilometers in diameter, near Fredefort in the Free State. 100 kilometers southwest of Johannesburg, now known as the Vredefort Dome, a South African World Heritage Site. The meteorite is said to have been larger than Table Mountain and caused a 1,000 megaton blast of energy. The impact would have heated about 70 cubic kilometers of rock and have increased the Earth's oxygen levels to a degree that made the development of multicellular life possible. The world has about 130 crater structures of possible impact origin. The Vredefort Dome is the largest in the world, followed by Sudbury Crater in Canada and the Chicxulub Crater in Mexico.
The Kalahari Transfrontier Park is a large wildlife preserve and conservation area in southern Africa. Kalahari means place of thirst. The total area is 38,000 square kilometers. Approximately 3/4 of the park lie in Botswana and 1/4 in South Africa. South Africa embraced the concept of transfrontiers linking ecological reserves across national borders. On the 12th of May 2000, President Festus Mogae of Botswana and Thabo Mbeki of South Africa formally launched South Africa's first peace park. It has 200 species of birds, including vultures, mammalians such as black Kalahari lions, and large herds of herbivores, namely elands, springboks, blue wildebeest, and more.
We're shooting a campaign. We're telling genuine stories from real people that have been affected by the SABC.
It's also interesting to get the backstory in terms of their dreams to be on screen and eventually getting the pleasure to do that.
And understanding that they're communicating on a platform that speaks to millions of people. It speaks to how the SABC can fulfill its mandate.
The SABC represents the opportunity for so many young South Africans, for old South Africans, to be able to look at the world that they may not experience any other way.
People should continue to pay their TV license because it allows the SABC to bring quality programming.
The TV license is really part of the lifeblood of the channel and the corporation.
When you're listening to your favorite jams, you're listening to your favorite radio DJ, you must know that you made it possible by paying your TV license.
It's such a holistic process that goes into TV licenses. It's not only one part where we say South Africans have to pay for TV licenses. You pay a TV license because you get so much value out of it, and that's the content that you get every single day on the SABC platforms.
I have been in the film industry now for 51 years. I am quite satisfied with the evolution of television now, that you have got a lot of actors and you have got a lot of crew members, which will also play part of paying our licenses, because I think it's proper.
Did you know the Big Hole digging started in 1871 and ended on the 14th August 1914? The hole produced 2,722 kgs of diamonds. However, one diamond as huge as 490 carat of stone found in the open prior 1868 gave them the interest to dig. Extracted from 22.5 million tons of soil. Today, the hole sits at a breathtaking 214 meters deep. Kimberley Big Hole attracts tourists from all over the world, taking a vintage tram past the city, then cycling around the Big Hole.
In the belly of the beast, the vulnerable are easy targets in the streets. Marauding gangs terrorize communities mercilessly. With no respect for human life, animals are also not spared The money business knows no boundaries. There is no respect for life. Helpless communities, silenced by their pain. Can their last defense be in time to the rescue? Special assignment, Saturday at 5:30 p.m. when we unravel the truth.
A very good morning, Jumbo Africa. This is the second hour here in the newsroom. It's 10:00 hours Central African time. I'm Elvis Preslin.
Good morning, I'm Kendall Mahamad.
Now, we will be with you until 12 o'clock today. The focus is on our neighbors, Kendall, this morning, Zimbabwe.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Want to find out from you, what do you make of what's been going on out in Zimbabwe? Of course, there's quite a lot that's been happening. The deputy president being expelled and also running away. I want to find out from you, really, what is your assessment of the situation in Zimbabwe?
Matthew says Mugabe is old enough. He must just resign. He's running Zimbabwe as if he's running a spaza shop.
Warren Sean says Zimbabweans should go home in numbers and vote Mugabe out of power rather than running away and becoming other countries' problems. We have Zuma and the Guptas to deal with our belief.
Well, those are your comments. You can keep them coming. We'll read them as we continue. But here at home, we're focusing on the Hawks that say that they're investigating whether or not charges should be laid against the investigative journalist Jacques Pauw.
Absolutely. The State Security Agency said it had laid charges against Pauw for allegedly contravening certain sections of the Intelligence Act with his book, The President's Keeper. So we want to find out from you, we've got two options for you. What cases should the Hawks be investigating? A, Gupta leaks, or B, the author, Jacques Pauw?
Well, so far, 349 votes in. Only 13% of that number are suggesting that Jacques Pauw should be investigating. And 87, the majority are saying the Gupta leaks must be investigated. It's a year old. Why not?
A very valid question. Siafana comes in with, they must be focused on the Gupta leaks.
Nazim Grootboom says, simply and clear, corruption and Gupta leaks, Jacques Pauw, the president's keepers, Hawks, hashtag SSA. Oh, simply and clear, Gupta leaks. That's what must be investigated. But it's a big night for Bafana Bafana tonight. And of course, we are wondering about Coup. But we also know that if we lose tonight, it's all over, right?
Yeah, we also have some news on what's happening in the rest of the camp. But the big thing for us is one of get your score predictions for tonight. Bafana Bafana against Senegal, first of a two-legged World Cup qualifier. We must win if we're going to get to Russia. Well, what do you make? What do you think is going to be the score at the end of tonight?
Is it a bird, is it the plane, or is it Superman? And this one from Vim K says, South Africa 2, Senegal 1.
Siafana says Russia 2018, it's going to be 2-1 for Bafana Bafana, and he trusts that this team is going to play very well. Lots of positivity from some of you that have actually been responding on this question. Let's hope it carries into the camp, into the pitch, and Bafana get that 2-1 win.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at your news segments. Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba has deferred to the presidency as he refused to weigh in on reports that the president, Jacob Zuma, could announce free higher education for all in the country. And as allegations in the Eskom saga intensify, the former PRASA CEO Lucky Montana says he was introduced to the Gupta family by the then Transport Minister Ben Martins. And the Hawks say they are investigating whether or not charges should be laid against the investigative journalist Jacques Pauw. Those are your headlines. Before we get there to the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the front page.
Elvis, quite a lot. You know what, front and center, we're looking at what's happening in the Bafana Bafana camp, but we also have quite a lot. The Springboks will be playing, and we're looking forward to see how they're going to perform against Ireland. And we all know that just next week, 2023 Rugby World Cup bid will be announced, so we hope it's going to be us. And of course, quite a lot going on.
For that one, hey?
Oh yes, we're all holding thumbs for that one. But let me get right to it. This is what we've got for you in the sports today.
Tyson looks like he's going to struggle for this one, and we're not going to take any chances.
Bafana's injury woes get worse, and it seems likely that the defense might have to do without captain Thulani Hlatshwayo, who could be out with an injury to his toe. And Springbok coach Alistair Coetzee brings back the controversial centre Damian Yende to his starting lineup as one of the 3 changes to the side to play Ireland on the weekend.
When I opened my iPad and I read that letter from Sir Sebastian Coe and inviting me and congratulating me on this reward, I was out of this world, really. I couldn't believe it.
Hans Botha, the coach of South African 400-meter world record holder, Olympic champion and world champion Wade van Niekerk, has been named 2017 Coach of the Year of the International Association of Athletics Federation.
Well, Gardner on a charge, but nobody can stop the world record holder.
Yes, the Hans Botha Wade van Niekerk juggernaut continues to roll on. All this and more a little later in the Sports Bulletin. Stay with Elvis as he's got the news.
Yes, Kendall. Wonderful story there, Hans Botha. And of course, it just shows you a mother's love. She treats him like a child. That is now Wade van Niekerk and Hans. They like mother and child on the track. And that's why the winning team. But now, top story this hour. The Finance Minister, Malusi Gigaba, says international investors should not be worried about whether or not the ANC elective conference will take place in December, as this is something that will happen. He was speaking from New York, where he is leading an investor roadshow.
I think one of the very interesting questions which I have found in the conversation is not only questions about policies that will emanate from the conference or who will be elected at the conference, because people do understand that there is a contestation and the ANC conference will elect a leader. But an intriguing question for me, which has been raised by investors, is whether the ANC conference is going to take place or not, given some of the challenges that have been experienced in some of the provincial and regional conferences across the country. We have assured them that the conference is going to take place. It is a conference of branches, and the audit of branches has been concluded. We therefore are confident that the conference is going to go ahead, and they need to take leave from the signals which have been sent in terms of policy by the National Policy Conference in July. And so to the extent that we can, we are very confident that the conference will take place, a new leadership will be elected, and the policy signals have been sent by the policy conference.
Meanwhile, concerns are mounting that the country might face further ratings downgrades, with Moody's currently in South Africa ahead of a possible announcement before the end of the year. And the Reserve Bank Governor, Lesetja Kganyago, is among those leadership of a South African business and government delegation speaking to investors as part of the 5-city, 4-country roadshow.
Well, if South Africa gets downgraded, that would mean that we will now have less than 2 investment grade ratings in terms of our domestic currency denominated debt. That would mean that we fall out of some of the key bond indices, and a lot of the investors that we have been talking about here are invested in South Africa. They are tracking this bond index. The World Government Bond Index is the most important one. If we fall out of that bond index, it means that some of these investors will have to liquidate their positions in South Africa. So if they do that and the currency depreciates, you might have rising inflation, and but at the same time, we might be attracting other forms of investment. That investment is going to be investment of a speculative nature, which means that South Africa is going to be faced with more volatile capital flows than we had seen in the past.
Now, South Africa might end up with a government that is as evil as the apartheid regime. That is, if the civil society doesn't keep the ANC government in check. This is according to investigative journalist and author Jacques Pauw. Now, he was speaking at another launch of his controversial and best-selling book, The President's Keepers, in Pretoria last night, and there was no blackouts.
An explosive expose from the manipulation of law enforcement agencies, the purging of those opposing state capture, and the looting of state coffers. The President's Keepers author also accuses President Jacob Zuma of tax evasion.
If Jacob Zuma's only income has been his presidential salary since May 2009, why would he not open his tax affairs for us to have a look at?
The Revenue Service accused Pauw of contravening tax laws for publishing President Jacob Zuma's tax affairs. The State Security Agency also accused him of contravening the Intelligence Service Act. But Pauw denied reports that criminal charges had been laid against him.
The spokesperson of the State Security Agency said that they laid a charge against me. The Hawk said, no, it's not a charge, it's only a complaint.
Former Finance Minister also graced the event. He signed some copies of the President's Keepers.
What we do need in South Africa at the moment is more Jacques Pauws in government, in civil society, in business, in the labor movement, so that we can bring the truth out. We can show the minority of people who are bringing this country to its knees that the majority don't want that.
Jacques Pauw also denied allegations that he had a racist agenda by publishing the President's Keepers. This as he also kept the apartheid government in check back then. The President's Keepers is currently one of the best-selling books both locally and internationally. Offenses Timo, SABC News, Brooklyn, Pretoria.
And the song that was played just before Jacques Pauw started the book launch was Turn on the Lights. But that's why we're asking you this question this morning. On the poll, what should the Hawks be focusing on? And 349 votes in. So far, 87% of you are suggesting that the Gupta leaks should be investigated. And 13% are saying that Jacques Pauw should be investigated. Only 13%. And you're also tweeting us on the matter on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom. I'll read them a little bit later. Meanwhile, the Deputy Public Enterprises Minister, Ben Martins, has described the suspended Eskom Head of Legal Services, Suzanne Daniels, as a liar. This follows shocking revelations made by Daniels before the parliamentary probe into state capture and maladministration at Eskom. Daniels alleges that Martins tried to manipulate the court case against the ousted CEO of Eskom, Brian Molefe. She said she held a meeting with the Deputy Minister, Ajay Gupta, Duduzane Zuma, and a Chinese lady through a Gupta associate, Salim Essa. Daniels told Parliament that the Gupta family wanted to know the progress on the Molefe court case. Martins has denied attending the meeting in question.
The meeting, the alleged phantom coffee tea party meeting that was spoken about, I have not been party to such a meeting. One of the first occasions when I met the Gupta brothers was after my appointment as the Deputy Minister of Public Enterprises. Not this term, around 2013.
Well, that phantom meeting, Ben Martins suggests. Meanwhile, the South African government does not know the whereabouts of the ex-Zimbabwean Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa. That's the word from International Relations and Corporations Minister Maitenakwane Mashabane. Mnangagwa reportedly fled to South Africa after he was fired by the President Robert Mugabe earlier this week.
Reports out of Zimbabwe say Mnangagwa fled the country on Tuesday. Details around his whereabouts are still sketchy, but some believe he's already in South Africa. On Wednesday, expelled war veterans threw their weight behind Mnangagwa. SADC's chair, South Africa, says it has no information of his whereabouts.
We have no information about the whereabouts of the former vice president of Zimbabwe.
Back in Zimbabwe, it's business as usual. President Robert Mugabe officiated at the renaming of the airport. The Harare airport will now be called the Robert Mugabe International Airport.
It is indeed a great honor for me, and I'm humbled by this gesture. My government recognizes that air transport is pivotal to the economic growth of our country. While transport in general accelerates the movement of people and goods in a cost-effective way, air transport facilitates and promotes national and regional trade, tourism, investment, and integration.
Meanwhile, the ZANU-PF Politburo on Thursday also expelled Mnangagwa as the party's vice president. Lehana Tsotitsi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Staying with the story, in an unusual development, President Robert Mugabe's ruling ZANU-PF party is to hold a special congress this December ahead of the elections in 2018. The extraordinary congress has been brought forward by 2 years. Meanwhile, Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa's ally, Energy Motodi, says a coup is likely in Zimbabwe if President Robert Mugabe fails to carefully choose his successor amid the rising succession tensions within the ruling ZANU-PF. For more on Zimbabwe, we are now joined from our Cape Town studio by political analyst Brian Ratupoulos from the Solidarity Peace Trust. Sir, a very good morning to you and welcome.
Morning and welcome. Thank you very much.
Now, there is suggestions that there could be a military coup in Zimbabwe. Is that even possible?
I would doubt it at this stage. I think when Mugabe moved against his former Vice President Mnangagwa, he had already begun to put in place changes within the military. People have been moved either into ministerial positions or given positions as ambassadors, those who considered close to the Vice President. And I think that it's highly unlikely at this stage that there would be a coup.
Now, there's also talk that the fired deputy president had some very good links within the military, that that could be the key to that possible coup. Do you agree with that?
Well, certainly he had links. He's been in the military, in the security since the days of the liberation struggle. And there are obviously people there who still support him, as well as people in the war veterans movement who support him. But I think, as I said before, I think Mugabe would not have made a move like this without already having made changes to people he considered close to Mnangagwa and begun to move them. I think those who are contemplating a coup also know it's unlikely to be accepted in the region or on the continent. So I would say at this stage, even though, of course, we should be concerned about the possible intra-party violence within ZANU-PF, I would doubt that there would be a coup.
Now, looking at the Congress that was moved 2 years prior to now in December, of course, what do you make of that? And is that possibly to also ensure that Mugabe has the support that he needs in order to promote his wife to be either vice president or even first lady? Or president, so to speak?
I think so. I think so. I think the likely chance that she could become vice president. I still have my doubts that she would succeed Mugabe as president. I think that we still may have some surprise in store there. And I think her position would be tenuous in the absence of Mugabe. So my sense is that that position, future position of president, there's still some question marks around that.
Mm-hmm. Now, we heard earlier that he really is consolidating his position. That is now the President Robert Mugabe. Is that really the case, you think?
I think so. I mean, I think that he has been consolidating his position for a long time now. He moved against former Vice President Mujuru, who he considered a possible successor. He's done the same thing against Mnangagwa. And the irony of this is, of course, that Mugabe himself has been fanning factionalism within his party throughout the post-colonial period, pretending to be above those factions when he, in fact, has been fanning that factionalism himself in order to weaken and provincialize possible successors and to be able to put in place someone that he wants without the kind of opposition that might have been there.
if there are these internal factions within the ruling party, why do you think the MDC or even the opposition parties are not capitalizing on this prospect of this disunity within the ruling party?
That's largely because the opposition are themselves in disarray. There are at the moment 3 alliances in place, and there's no sign at the moment that they're likely to come together. So the divisions that have grown really since the post-Government of National Unity period have not helped to bring together the opposition, and that's a major challenge now. At a time when they could have been capitalizing on these issues, they're not doing so, and as things stand, not likely to do so.
The economic situation in Zimbabwe is not good. Why do you think is there still people in Zimbabwe that feel Robert Mugabe should be their leader, and the ZANU-PF party for that matter?
Well, that's a combination of issues. One is that notwithstanding all the problems of ZANU-PF, they still have a membership base, they still have a support base as a result of a combination of things, the legacy of the liberation, the allocation of land, the patronage, vast patronage network that subsists, and of course the very strong legacy of violence. Violence against any dissenting voices, electoral violence, and as we've seen within ZANU-PF, removal of anybody considered to be in opposition to Mugabe. So this legacy of coercion and violence combined with the patronage network has allowed Mugabe and the ZANU-PF to retain certain levels of support.
Do you think that after the conference, Mugabe will still retain this family dynasty basically by promoting his wife into that position of deputy or even vice president?
I think that the faction around him, the so-called G40 faction, will remain in place. And what they'll try to do, I think, is to try and unify as much as they can ahead of the elections, unify also by coercively marginalizing any dissenting voices. And then after the elections, I think we could again see some rearrangement on the political terrain in terms of the various alliances, possible people coming together in different forms. So I think it will be very fluid again after the elections.
The expulsion of Mnangagwa, is that likely to have any impact on the political stability in Zimbabwe?
Look, I think in the short term, of course, there's threats of intra-party violence, and that, of course, is worrying. But I think ZANU-PF are already moving to remove any supporters of Mnangagwa who still remain in the party. There'll be further expulsions, marginalizations of those considered close to Mnangagwa. And as I said, they will do what they need to do to try and consolidate before the next election. And they probably be assisted by the fact that the opposition are still not fully united to be able to capitalize on this development.
So thank you so much for your time and joining us in our Cape Town studios.
Thank you very much.
That was political analyst Brian Raftopoulos from the Solidarity Peace Trust chatting to us about the situation in Zimbabwe. And that's why we're asking you the question in relation to Zimbabwe, what is your assessment of the situation, not just politically, but even from a human rights perspective? And let us take a look at what you are telling us on the Twitter handle. Ntabisi says, MDC disappointed us Zimbabweans by splitting. I don't see any other party winning besides ZANU-PF unless they, the MDC, regroup and elect one candidate. They need unity. Sir Kareji says, it's now all about the Mugabe family. The rest of us don't matter anymore. Mugabe has lost control of his wife. It's a mess. This one from Tembankosi says, Ace Lumumba is Grace puppet. We know he wants to split the votes. Mugabe is now using this tactic of vote splitting. Those are some of your comments. Keep them coming. We'll read them as we continue. But right now, we'll take a short break, and when we return, we'll give you more.
Africa is constantly getting new technologies, and with that comes new terms.
Massive, open, online university. And primarily what they are doing is they're established in the community, so they're well established within the Soweto community.
Internet of Things also covers small sensors, so you can do like home security, motion detectors, IP cameras.
Our network will simplify these terms for you. We also have new gadgets and social media.
When it falls on the grounds and then the battery, everything falls off, people just put it all together and then your phone is back in shape.
The Vlega app, we initially started off by doing this manually.
The internet is actually my favorite fashion invention of all time.
That's Network with Ms. Mumelele Zondi every Sunday at 9 p.m. on SABC News.
As promised, we're staying with the story of Zimbabwe. Now, SABC News spoke to Arsi Lumumba. He's the leader of the recently launched youth party Viva Zimbabwe, and Tino Mambeo from the Zimbabwe Exiles Forum.
What is happening in Zimbabwe is two things that people must pay attention to. One is the maturity of Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans are now more politically mature than they've ever been at any point in our history. You have more Zimbabweans having conversations about what is next for Zimbabwe than we've ever had. This is why you're starting to see Zimbabweans suggesting who should take over, when they should take over, how they should take over. But I think the second thing that has happened in Zimbabwe is you now have Mugabe trying to create a dynasty and the effect of that within his own party. The only reason you have a ZANU-PF and a fragmented opposition is because the opposition will not change the person who is leading the opposition. So because they will not change the person leading the opposition, it seems like there's a lot of fights. But there's not really a lot of fights. There's a fight between Mugabe and the people of Zimbabwe. What's stopping the people of Zimbabwe from moving forward is there is no more champion to go against this thing called ZANU-PF. But ultimately, there's a maturity. It's a maturity process where as a country, we are all growing up. We're now at a new stage of our democracy where we're starting to question the politics, and we are about to change the politics. It's inevitable.
Okay, we'll explore that a little bit further. So I once heard an alarming statistic that the number of Zimbabweans that have left the country over the years is the biggest number proportionally during peace times. So there's a lot of Zimbabweans in the diaspora, a lot of Zimbabweans here in South Africa. And I'm just wondering, as an exile movement, how are you viewing what's happening back home? And are you hopeful that things might be changing, as Mr. Lumumba is suggesting, to a degree that there will be change in the country?
Well, first of all, I think it will be very fair to start by welcoming the former Vice President, Emmerson Mnangagwa. We know that he has left the country. He might probably be in South Africa or wherever he is, but he has joined the many millions of Zimbabweans in the diaspora. And we welcome him. The events around his leaving the country are well noted. They've been well reported. And he's running away from a system that we have always said that this is a dangerous system. And as things stand, you might see a lot more Zimbabweans coming or going into the diaspora. ZANU-PF is a machinery that understands and uses violence to achieve its ends. Now, it does not know neighbor, or it does not know child, it does not know anybody when it comes to the threat of power being meted on Mugabe himself. So in the coming weeks, if the events continue to unfold under the way they are unfolding, you are going to see an influx of all Lacoste supporters or Mnangagwa supporters. Remember, their leader is already outside the country, and we will expect under normal circumstances.
But is he going to be wearing a ZANU-PF hat? What hat will he be wearing?
Well, what we think in terms of that is Mnangagwa, he has now joined Zimbabweans against a system. So we welcome him as a Zimbabwean who is now fighting a system that is anti-Zimbabwe.
Mr. Lumbumba, you were ZANU-PF through and through. So what we've noticed over time, people get expelled, thrown out of the party, and suddenly they open their eyes and they have a second awakening and start these opposition parties. Aren't you just one of these guys?
I think what I have made my mistakes, like every other human being, and I acknowledged my mistakes while I was in the party. I acknowledged my mistakes to the extent where I said, this is not the future I want. That's why I left the party. You must be able to differentiate my story and Emerson Mnangagwa's story. I didn't get fired out of the party. I left the party because here's one thing ZANU-PF has done effectively since 1980. ZANU-PF has broken every promise it has made to the Zimbabwean people. All Zimbabwean people ever asked for, the only thing all Zimbabwean people across the world are asking for is give us a promise that provides a pathway to prosperity. That promise was broken, and what we are all in search of right now is a new promise, and that new promise can only be delivered by my generation and by a generation that understands our future is way more important than the history that ZANU-PF shackles us to.
So how are you going to do that? What are you doing to change this generational shift that's going to change Zimbabwe?
It's a couple of things. You know, one of the reasons I'm in South Africa is I'm engaging a lot with international organizations. Zimbabweans who are in the business sector here. I spent my day today with a business community led by Tafazo Muguti and Joseph Busha. And these guys are starting to look at methods of how do we organize the Zimbabweans in the diaspora, so that when the tipping point, which is inevitable, takes place, we're all able to go back to Zimbabwe and we know where to begin. But my job on the ground, remember, I am the guy who is on the ground. I have 3 fundamental jobs. Job number 1, I have to get young people registered to vote. It's not a right for you to vote. It's a basic responsibility. Job number 2, I have to galvanize young people to understand we cannot be spectators to the political game. We have to contest for public office. Zimbabweans across the world have got the brightest ideas of how to move the country forward, and we can't leave that job to politicians. It's too risky, it's too dangerous. Job number 3, I have to play my part as Lumumba, and I simply have to keep doing what I'm doing right now. I have to talk to you, I have to continue talking to Zimbabwe, spreading the message that we can reimagine a new country only if we understand that the responsibility and the job is ours on task.
Mr. Mambeo, are people registering to vote, and are they going home to vote in the elections next year? Because the government is not going to enable you to vote in the diaspora, because they know that the reason that you've left to go into the diaspora is because you were not happy at home. So they're not going to bend over backwards for you. Are people prepared to go back to Zimbabwe, register and vote at home?
The job that we have carried forward as the Zimbabwean Exiles Forum is to try and engage the communities of Zimbabweans within the diaspora, especially in South Africa. We have been going to the farms, we have been going to the locations, we have been going to where we find our people, and we have spoken to them and we have said, we are trying to put mechanisms in place to ensure that especially now that the registration process is open, people must travel to the nearest border that is available. Because the system that we have now, it allows you to register anywhere in the country, though you will have to vote in your particular constituency. So what we are saying is we are putting measures across, and we are also appealing to the international community, donors, funders, and businesses alike to say we can group our people, because we know that most of the people that are here are really struggling to make ends meet. And to get 800 rand to go to the border and come back is quite heavy. But we are trying, we are really making progress.
Both of you are assuming that these elections are going to be the thing that solves the problems. There have been many elections before, and people were hopeful, especially the one 2008, where people thought that Tsvangirai had won the election, and that ZANU-PF always finds a way to make things work for them. They suffered a government of national unity for a while, but after that, they came back. What's going to be different now?
I think let's put the conversation you are raising into perspective. First of all, the greatest rigor of elections has never been ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF has never rigged an election to the extent that the Zimbabwean people have rigged the election. Here are the arithmetic figures. In the last election, 3 million people voted, 2 million for ZANU-PF, 1 million for MDC. There is 4.5 million virgin unregistered voters, all under the age of 40. So that's the real rigging. What ZANU-PF has done is it has taken its small contingent of supporters, gotten them to vote. MDC has done the same thing, but there's a new class, a new generation altogether. This is the generation, like the generation he's speaking about, that's in this country, that's in the diaspora. We're working together with the Zimbabwe Exiles Forum, James Busha and Tafazo. We've put $300,000 is now on the table to mobilize Zimbabweans to get them to the nearest border. Commissioners are now on site. It's Zimbabweans organizing themselves to vote. So what will make the vote different? It's simple. You can't rig an unriggable match. MDC has won many seats for over 20 years. I can tell you of Nelson Chamisa. I can tell you of Jesse Majome. I can tell you of Tendai Biti, who for 20 years, they've defeated ZANU-PF for one reason and one reason alone. When you mobilize your voting class, you can't rig 80% and say it was 10, but you can rig 10 and say it was 15. So we rig our own elections. But this time around, mark my words, Mr. Ndoro, mark my words, ZANU-PF, even if they rig this election, they will not get away with it. Zimbabweans will not let them. And I can tell you for certain, Grace Mugabe will never be my president.
So today, the airport was renamed Robert Mugabe International Airport. Yes. These are things that he's leaving behind his legacy. Are they going to stay, or are you going to reverse a lot of the things that have happened over the years?
Well, if we look at Robert Mugabe International Airport itself, it is a dilapidated institution that bears testament to the leadership failure of the man himself. So he has actually made a mockery of himself by naming such a dilapidated an airport that has never been improved or renovated. He goes and put his own name there. If we had left it like Harare, I think it would have made sense. So what we are thinking and what we are hoping for, that airport in a new Zimbabwe should be actually destroyed or left to be an elephant in the dark, and to build a proper airport for the people of Zimbabwe.
I think the real story to pay attention to when you're speaking about the airport is the 153 million they want to invest into the so-called refurbishments of it. This airport is not working. We are currently in a currency crisis where we don't have cash in the country. $200 million of bond notes are in the market right now, which is supposed to be backed by gold. If we took the same $153 million, if we put that towards our gold reserves and we're able to get gold and put gold in our refineries, we'll actually be able to have a currency, which means we'll be able to trade. So we are unable to trade because ZANU-PF has shown this. They are extremely reckless in their budgeting. They don't care about international appeal anymore.
When I was passing the casino, I said, that edge came, said, I'll just try, you never know. You might go home with 80,000, times 4 the amount that you have. And that stupid day, I lost all my money.
Never allow glamorous lifestyles to push you beyond your means.
The awakening moment was that 2007, when I left my children alone. I realized this is hurting me.
Ask for professional help if gambling is controlling you. Know when to stop.
I faced reality that, for you there's no quick reach, so you just have to work hard. So it's gone.
For all your uplifting stories, catch Bupilong every Friday at 17:30.
Phones, cloud systems, and robots have taken over a lot of what used to be done manually.
Our accounting system is actually based on the cloud.
Google nowadays can tell you where you parked your car.
And Africa's entrepreneurs are using technology to create.
With Pocket Masipala, you can basically do all the services that you would do at the municipality physically by going there, but you can now do them on a mobile app.
Join me, Siphumelele Zondi, on Sundays at 9 p.m. on SABC News.
Morning. My name is Kendall Makamate. You're watching Newsroom, and what a way to start the weekend. It's a massive weekend across the board, across all codes. But the best way to start is to talk about Wade van Niekerk and his coach, Hans Botha, who's been named the 2017 IAAF Coach of the Year. Her star athlete, Wade van Niekerk, is also in the running for a top award, having made the shortlist for the IAAF Athlete of the Year. SABC reporter Barry Clarkson caught up with Danny Ants, and here's what she had to say.
You know, it really was such a surprise, and I felt so humbled and privileged, and just to at my age and at this time of my life, to be blessed, to receive something like this. It really, it's amazing, and as I said, I felt so really privileged and blessed to receive an award like this.
How did you hear about this award? Oh, sorry, when did you hear that you'd actually won the award?
Last night, when I came back from my coaching session with my athletes, our manager, Mr. Piet van Zyl, phoned me while I was busy there, and he asked me about if I read my email. So I said, no, I'm still on track. So he said to me, okay, when you arrive at home, read your email and then you phone me again. And when I opened my iPad and I read that letter from Sir Sebastian Coe and inviting me and congratulating me on this reward, I was out of this world, really. I couldn't believe it.
The big question on everyone's lips, of course, is will Wade van Niekerk be there with you?
No, unfortunately not. Wade is still in Colorado with Dr. La Prada, who did the operation on him. But the progress is very positive and good, and his mindset is very positive. So the both of us are positive to work from here, but we have to be very, very patient, listen to his body, and work from day to day, take it day by day.
Are you optimistic that Wade will be ready for the next Olympic Games?
Yes, I think so. It was hard. It was really very hard to be able to put this negative behind us. But we will work very hard and be positive. And as I said, listen to his body. But we will work very hard to make out of this negative a very, very big positive, and to work through it and go through as stronger and better people.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for the support that you guys have shown me during these trying times. And please come out in numbers to support Bafana as we will be playing against Senegal tomorrow night, World Cup qualifiers. We need your full support. For Bafana Bafana, come show your love.
Well, there you have it. Esidimeni Kuna speaking the speech. Yes, come and support Bafana Bafana out in Polokwane as they take on Senegal. That was from the man himself. That is the mask he'll be wearing should he be playing. Now, fans that have not got their tickets yet can go on to their EFF offices in Polokwane. The city hosting a massive first leg showdown between South Africa and Senegal tonight. EFF leader Julius Malema tweeted yesterday inviting fans to their offices in Polokwane to come and collect their free tickets for the match. And in Parliament, his counterparts from other political parties did their bit, voicing their support for Bafana Bafana and urging fans to go to the stadium to support the team. Have a listen.
Wishing Bafana Bafana all the success as they take on Senegal. There's something about our country that reminds us we're a nation of winners. In fact, they must remember that in 1996 we won the African Cup of Nations, and that was shortly after reintegration, and a reminder that as South Africans, football is something that we've always taken pride in. We need to reclaim that spirit. We need to be the country that shows here in Africa how dominant we can be and be a part of the teams that will participate in the World Cup.
We want to wish Bafana Bafana all the best. We know that they are capable. You know, Waldo Emerson said, what lies behind us and what lies ahead of us cannot be compared to what lies within us. We believe, therefore, that they've got the potent potential to execute the task and come with the best results. You know, they must just take off pressure upon them and believe that all South Africans, the National Freedom Party and all South Africans are praying for them, they are behind them.
We are saying as the United Democratic Movement that this match against Senegal on Friday provides Bafana Bafana a rare opportunity once more to make us as a nation believe in our ability to achieve greatness, to believe in ourselves again, and to also raise the South African flag very high. So we're asking them to take this opportunity as we face a number of challenges as a country to motivate us, inspire us, make us believe once more in a better South Africa by beating Senegal.
Well, it's quite key and quite clear what it is they need to do. But two of the key players for Bafana Bafana are still doubtful for this qualifier against Senegal tonight. Team captain Thulani Hlatshwayo and number one keeper, as you all know, Itumeleng Khune, are still not 100% fit for this must-win encounter. The coach, Stuart Baxter, says it will be too risky to field players who are not fully fit for such a key match.
Khune's injury has been a major talking point all week. However, the reliable keeper has already had a couple of training sessions with the team despite arriving in Polokwane late. Khune has shown good progress since suffering a facial fracture on Sunday, but Baxter does not want to take any chances.
And I think with Itu, it's going to be a lot of confidence. He wore a mask. We're adjusting that slightly to try and make it better for him. If we're not sure that Itu feels comfortable enough to give a performance, we will not risk him.
To make matters worse, team captain Thulani Hlatshwayo is now also doubtful after joining the squad, suffering from a bruised toe.
Tyson looks like he's going to struggle for this one, and we're not going to take any chances. I think we need to be sure that we're not going to have a player that's going to come off after 5 minutes. So we're doubtful at this point, very doubtful that Tyson can take part.
The absence of Hlatshwayo in central defence will force Baxter to opt for either Eric Matoho, Clayton Daniels or Morgan Gold. Gold and Daniels, who are teammates at SuperSport United, were impressive in their 3-1 win over Burkina Faso recently.
I think whoever gets the call, we believe that he'll do 200%, give his best, not just for himself, not just for his country, but just to show the people that we are very serious about going to our next game with a very positive result, and which is a win.
Senegal, who are top of Group D with 8 points, have assembled their strongest possible side for this encounter, but Bafana Bafana players are not intimidated.
It's about rising to the challenge, I believe. Are we going to see many greater challenges in our career than 2 games to take ourselves to a World Cup? This is the top end, and this is really where you have to stand up, be counted, give absolutely everything, because if we don't, we're out.
Anything other than a win on Friday will end Bafana Bafana's hope of going to Russia next year. Sfeso Ramara, SABC News, Polokwane.
Right, and this weekend, the Springboks begin their end-of-year Northern Hemisphere tour with a really tough encounter. Springbok coach Alistair Coetzee must know that his time has come to show his mettle as they go up against Ireland on the weekend. Having made 3 changes, including Tendam Taurira and Kuni Oosthuizen, who are back in the front row, he's also included Damien Diayende starting at inside centre.
Coetzee is all in what will arguably be his side's toughest test of the 4 matches that constitute the end-of-year tour. Taurira and Oosthuizen will need to add stability to the set pieces, but also explosiveness, given that the forwards will see a lot of ball. Replacement front rowers Stephen Kitsoff and Wilco Lowe will play off the bench. Delandi comes into the starting 15 to replace Jan Serfontein, who's playing club rugby in France. The Stormers centre, who's played very little rugby this season, will need to keep his composure in one of the channels the Irish backs will target. Kutsia's other combinations are unchanged from the clash against New Zealand in early October. Elton Yankees and Ross Cronier are the halfbacks. Andre Pollard and Rudy Page are on the bench. Eben Etzebeth captains the side alongside Lut de Jager at lock, while Sia Kolisi, Peter Steph Dutoy and Francois Lowe are the same back row that started against the All Blacks. Saturday's match against Ireland kicks off at 7:30, followed by internationals against France, Italy and Wales.
Well, as you can see, come Monday morning, we'll either have a really wonderful Monday or it's going to be blue. Bafana against Senegal tonight and the Springboks against Ireland in Dublin on Saturday night. More about all of this a little later in the next Sports Bulletin. Make sure you stick around. Up next, the weather forecast.
A lot of us rely on tech to survive, and Africa is already a mobile-first continent.
We build mobile technology that connects motorcycle taxis to commuters and businesses in real time.
My phone was the most important thing.
Africans are using technology to innovate. On Network, we have African technology and social media news. Even robots have heard about us.
Hello, watch Network on SABC.
For African technology and social media news, join Ms. Phumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 9 p.m.
Show me a greater power on the whole continent of Africa. Show me a greater power anywhere.
6th of June 1918 was the establishment of our movement to maintain that.
We need to do something about the educational upliftment of the Afrikaner, and we also need to do something about the economic upliftment of the Afrikaner. And that was the two main goals at that stage in 1918.
The Broederbond never was a cultural organization. It was a state-capturing organization. It is, in fact...
I like that term.
It has captured the financial systems. It has captured the parastatals. It has captured cultural organizations.
For all your constitutional and legal matters, tune into Rights and Recourse on Sundays between 2 and 3 Central African Time.
Sports Live, Saturday and Sundays at 8:30 p.m.
Lindiwe Sisulu was educated in Swaziland and in Canada. She was tortured in detention during apartheid for having banned ANC material. Lindiwe worked as a lecturer at the Manzini Teachers Training College in the mid-1980s. She joined the MK in exile and was intelligence operative. During 1990, when she returned to South Africa, she worked as President Jacob Zuma's PA.
As we are gathered here today, nourishing the fruits of liberation, we recognize that some of our gallant men and women with whom we fought in the deep, ugly trenches of war are not here.
She held numerous parliamentary positions since 1994, including Minister of Intelligence, Deputy Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of Public Service and Administration, Minister of Defence and Military Veterans, and member of the ANC's National Executive Committee. Lindiwe was awarded Human Rights Center Fellowship in Geneva in 1992, Presidential Award for Housing Delivery by the Institute for Housing of South Africa in 2004, and International Association for Housing Science Award in 2005. Lindiwe is the current Minister of Human Settlements.
Viva! It is a must. I, Lindiwe Sisulu, have committed myself to these principles. We must stop corruption. It is alien to our movement and it is harming us. We must unshackle ourselves from the stronghold of undemocratic processes. The ANC is not for sale. So for heaven's sake, don't let anybody buy your vote. And don't you buy anybody's vote.
It's a must. Fashion influencers are diversifying the industry, leading a fashion revolution like never before.
It's time for us to come together now. What we face is the most significant moment in the history of this subcontinent.
Armstrong uses still with soft drawings and watercolors to create a disruption within the exhibition.
What you see in the show is almost like a snapshot of me as a being in process.
The band's so excited about their latest creation and believe it's their best work yet.
It's a happy album. It's got 8 tracks. First single, which is Nana in it, and Nana is pumping already.
For your weekly dose of entertainment news, tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
When I was passing the casino, I said, that edge came, said, I'll just try, you never know. You might go home with 80,000, times 4 the amount that you have. And that stupid day, I lost all my money.
Never allow glamorous lifestyles to push you beyond your means.
The awakening moment was that 2007, when I left my children alone. I realized this is hurting me.
Ask for professional help if gambling is controlling you. Know when to stop.
I faced reality that, for you there's no quick reach, so you just have to work hard. So it's gone.
For all your uplifting stories, catch Bupilong every Friday at 17:30. We are your eyes in all major events around the world.
A wonder not seen in the United States in almost 100 years.
It looks like the sky of a different world. You see the stars out during the day. You see a sunset 360 degrees all around you.
Before you leave, make sure that Robburn is taking you through traffic alert all around South Africa.
All we can do is stick to what we do and focus on our own job and not focus on them.
The Boks will also don the red jersey in this match to mark the 25th anniversary of rugby unity in South Africa.
An update on all major currency to guide you. A story of women in jail told in pictures by Fatima Mir through art that will blow your mind. Set the agenda for the day with Morning Live.
A meteorite hit the Earth 2 million years ago, creating an enormous impact of crater, about 10 kilometers in diameter, near Vredefort in the Free State, 100 kilometers southwest of Johannesburg, now known as the Vredefort Dome, a South African World Heritage Site. The meteorite is said to have been larger than Table Mountain and caused a 1,000 megaton blast of energy. The impact would have heated about 70 cubic kilometers of rock and have increased the Earth's oxygen levels to a degree that made the development of multicellular life possible. The world has about 130 crater structures of possible impact origin. The Vredefort Dome is the largest in the world, followed by Sudbury Crater in Canada and the Chicxulub Crater in Mexico.
A very good morning and a warm welcome to the final hour here on the Newsroom. I'm Elvis Preslin. We'll be with you until 12 o'clock. Now, of course, you know that the focus is on Zimbabwe this morning, and we want to find out from you, what do you make, what is your assessment of the situation in Zimbabwe? There's the question on your screen. Let's take a look at what, in fact, we're going to read your comments a little bit later.
That's right.
We're also focusing, Kendall, on the issues here at home.
Absolutely.
Jacques Pauw's book again in the spotlight.
Yeah, we gave two options to you for you to take part in this poll. Wanted to find out from you whether the Hawks should be focusing on the Gupta leaks or Jacques Pauw's book and himself and his book. And obviously the overwhelming majority of you that have voted is 88% saying Gupta leaks.
422 votes. But right now, let's get down to business at first and take a look at your headlines, and thereafter we'll take a look at this one. Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba has deferred to the presidency as he refused to weigh in on reports that the President Jacob Zuma could announce free higher education for all in the country. As allegations in the Eskom saga intensify, the former process CEO Lucky Montana says he was introduced to the Gupta family by the then Transport Minister Ben Martins. And the Hawks say they are investigating whether charges should be laid against the investigative journalist Jacques Pauw. Those are your headlines. Before we get there, let's find out from Kendall Makamata what's happening on the sports front.
Elvis, thank you very much. We're all rushing to get into the weekend. Lots of business to take care of before first. Good morning to you. This is what we have in the sports today.
Looks like he's going to struggle for this one, and we're not going to take any chances.
Bafana's injury woes get worse, as it seems likely that the defiance might have to do without captain Thulani Hlatshwayo, who could be out with an injury to his toe. And Springbok coach Alistair Coetzee brings back controversial centre Damian Deyende to his starting lineup as one of the three changes to the side to play Ireland on the weekend.
When I opened my iPad and I read that letter from Sir Sebastian Coe and inviting me and congratulating me on this reward, I was out of this world, really. I couldn't believe it.
And sport coach of South African 400-meter world record holder, Olympic champion and world champion Wade van Niekerk has been named 2017 Coach of the Year by the International Association of Athletics Federations.
Gardner on a charge, but nobody can stop the world record holder. Van Niekerk takes the gold.
Phenomenal, that's what we've got for you, but I do know that Elvis has got some riveting news for him. Order of the day, let's back to him now.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this hour. The Finance Minister, Malusi Gigaba, says that international investors should not be worried about whether or not the ANC elective conference will take place in December, as this is something that will happen. He was speaking from New York, where he's leading an investor roadshow.
One of the very interesting questions which I have found in the conversation is not only questions about policies that will emanate from the conference or who will be elected at the conference, because people do understand that there is a contestation and the ANC conference will elect a leader. But an intriguing question for me, which has been raised by investors, is whether the ANC conference is going to take place or not, given some of the challenges that have been experienced in some of the provincial and regional conferences across the country. We have assured them that the conference is going to take place. It is a conference of branches, and the audit of branches has been concluded. We therefore are confident that the conference is going to go ahead, and they need to take leave from the signals which have been sent in terms of policy by the National Policy Conference in July. And so to the extent that we can, we are very confident that the conference will take place, a new leadership will be elected, and the policy signals have been sent by the policy conference.
Now, the James Sedgwick Distillery in Wellington, where Three Ships whiskey is distilled, was established in 1886 rather. And it continues to set the bar for South African whiskies and innovation in the whiskey industry. It's a proudly South African whiskey, and in 2015, the distillery won Best International Whiskey Distillery of the Year at the New York International Spirits Competition. This year, at the Whiskey Live Spirits that's happening in Sandton, which started on the 8th until the 10th of November at the Sandton Convention Centre, Three Ships Whiskey will launch the world and South Africa's first whiskey finish in a cask, previously used for the maturation of pinotage. Now, with only 3,500 bottles available to consumers, the Three Ships 15-year-old pinotage cask finish is the oldest whiskey to date that is launched in this country. Now, Master Distiller Andy Watts, who was only the 6th manager to hold the position since the distillery's inception in the 1800s, joined us in studio earlier this week. And I started off by asking him how the Three Ships 15-year-old whiskey with a pinotage cask finish came about.
It's an idea I first came up with in the early 2000s. I always had this passion to want to make something which was a proudly South African whiskey, but finished with one of my favorite red wine varietals, which is pinotage, which is also a proudly South African grape varietal. So it really was, how do I put the two together? Yes. When you're talking cask finish, you don't want the wine to overpower the whiskey. So it was a matter of spending a lot of time experimenting, innovating, until you eventually come up with the finished product.
What is the secret ingredient that make your whiskey so great? Because a number of people are talking about this.
I don't think there's one magic answer to that. I think it's an incredible team which we have at the James Sedgwick Distillery, a team which has been with me now for the last 28, 29 years. One which allows me to be able to come to Johannesburg and be at the Whiskey Festival and know that our whiskey's in very good hands back at the James Sedgwick Distillery. So not one real magic word.
What are at your exhibition stand that people must come and see and taste?
Where I'll be doing a vertical tasting of all the single malts which Three Ships have launched since 2003. So if you can get along to that one, that would be very nice. But on the stand itself, apart from having the normal range, the Select, the Bourbon Cask, the Premium Select 5-year, which was the world's best blended whiskey in 2012, the 10-year-old vintage 2005 will be there, as well as the very special pinotage cask finish. But we also have what we call a micro distillery, where if you taste 2 of our whiskies at the stand, then you get the opportunity to actually make your own whiskey in a small, let's say, computerized version of a distillery, which is quite a fun thing to do, actually.
Where you can mix your own whiskey?
You make your own whiskey.
So you make your own blend?
Yeah, that's right. We give the components, and then the people will choose from the different components. You know, do they like a whiskey which is smoky, or do they like it which is light, sweeter? And, you know, they've got the opportunity then to do that.
That's fantastic. And once you've blended, do you keep it as...
That's right. No, you take it away with you. And,
I tell you.
Yeah.
That might be quite an experience. But take us through the entire range that you're going to have. You talked about the 5-year-old, which I think was quite incredible. A best blended whiskey in the world a couple of years ago.
Yeah, each year in London there's the World Whiskey Awards, where they celebrate the... world's best malt whiskey, grain whiskey and blended whiskey. And in 2012 we were fortunate enough to walk away with the title with the 5-year-old, blend as the world's best blended whiskey.
And I'll tell you why I asked that question, because a lot of people, whiskey drinkers, would say, no, no, I only drink a 12-year-old upwards. Why is it a 5-year-old so good?
It was actually, I spent time in the in the mid-1980s to the late 1980s in Scotland learning how to make whiskey. And when I came back to South Africa, the company then placed me at the James Sedgwick distillery, and my main role then was to create whiskies which showed that although we really respect what Scotland and the rest of the world do, it's not their sole prerogative to make world-class whiskies. And the first whiskey I actually created was in 1992, and that was the Three Ships 5-year-old. Now, in those days, whiskies in South Africa didn't really carry ages. So something like a 5-year-old back in 1992 was something special, because there was really only the blends which were on the market then. And so 5-year was special then. It's not really a special age anymore, but we've stuck with it for that particular brand. What we try to say as well is that in South Africa, with our climate being a lot warmer than a lot of our Northern Hemisphere colleagues, that higher temperature in our maturation process actually accelerates it. So it actually makes our whiskies appear to be older and smoother at a younger age. So I think by having a 5-year on it, it actually makes people sit back and say, wow, after just 5 years, can a whiskey be as smooth and as soft as what this one particular whiskey is?
Now, whiskey drinkers would say Scottish or Irish, that is my preferred poison. What would you say to them in relation to South African whiskies, especially Three Ships, the range?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first written record of whiskey was in Scotland over 500 years ago. We've been making whiskey in South Africa for 40 years. Three Ships as a brand was launched in 1977. So again, the utmost respect for what the Scots and the Irish have done. But it is not their sole purpose to make whiskey. The rest of the world can do too. So we've got a full range of whiskies now. The Three Ships Select, which we say is an entry-level whiskey. In other words, it's a whiskey which can very easily be mixed. It can be put into a high glass, lots of ice, ginger ale, slice of orange and lemon on a hot day like today. Then we've got the bourbon cask finish, which is a blended whiskey, but again, one which offers you a little bit of sweetness. Whiskey is a totally natural product. It's water, grains, and yeast. So there is no sugar. You cannot add sugar. You cannot add flavorants. So everything you must get from the cask or from the barley. So with the bourbon cask finish, we've got an American oak cask, which gives a slight sweetness to it. The 5-year Premium Select, which is quite a smoky, robust, complex whiskey for a blend. Then we move on to the single malt, which again, complex, slight smoke, subtle. And the Pinotage cask finish, which is just something really special. You've got to taste it to really appreciate what flavors are in there.
Proudly South African whiskey available in Sandton. It's the last night tonight of the Whiskey Live, so you can go out there and get yourself a tipple. Meanwhile, an interpreter broke down and had to be rushed out of the Life Esidimeni arbitrations during the testimony of a family member. Now, this as family members continue to give emotional accounts of their experience. There, 141 patients died after being moved into the care of unlicensed NGOs. The hearing led by retired Judge Dikgang Motsoeneke are seeking answers and redress. Let's go there live.
In which patients were distributed into. And all of those people, including Life Esidimeni, I went back to the new CEO to find out, to give me the list and verify the list of the patients that I'd received from the two advocates. And all of them, I think, cooperated in this matter. I then looked at the terms of reference for the arbitration, and they are covered under the title Entitlement Criteria, which is under that there's a section 2.1 and 2.2, which marks, I think, the terms of reference. And in short, it says that all people that died before the 30th of June or a month after the relocation process should be included in the list of those that are eligible. And I prepared my report with this in mind. And as you remember, the original was to prepare this report and only send it to you confidentially without sending it across. And that's what I did, but I actually did indicate that I'm prepared, I think, to put it on the record if that was necessary, and that's maybe the reason why I'm here. And clearly, I'm now going to say how I have prepared the report, because you might have to look at it.
Yes, let's start at, that is on the same page 2, under I provide the report organized as follows.
Yeah. I have made a summary table of the official figures in accordance to the terms of reference of the arbitration process. That is section 2.1 and 2.2.
Well, before you go far, I'm intrigued by a scientist who quotes poets and other writers.
I'll come to that.
Oh, you will come to that?
I'll come to that.
Okay.
It's just the way I do things. The second table is, I have gone to each facility where people have died, and I have provided a table for each facility as to the number of people who died. But not only that, I provided that table from the time of the marathon project. So for each facility, I went since October and say, how many people died here, who died here, and it's provided as a table so that for each you are aware of when did a person die, in which facility, at which month, up until September 2017. So from about 2015, for each facility, I've done that per month, and the table is included as part of my document.
Yes, let's get to it.
Basically, I can just summarize it as follows. That if you look at the table, which you might have or you might not have.
Let me do this for the record. That is, under A, you make reference to a summary table of the official figures in accordance with the terms of reference of the ADR. Under B, a summary table of total death per facility and period in accordance with the terms of reference of the ADR. And C, a detailed spreadsheets of all deceased patients up to 30 June 2017.
Yes.
Then under D, in addition and included is a list of 4 deceased patients highlighted in yellow up to 1st September. That should be end of September.
Yeah, end of September, yes.
The 1st of September is an error.
Typo. Yeah.
So up to the end of September 2017.
Let me summarize.
You'll explain that
let
later
me just
on.
summarize it as follows. That in order to start this, we had to study the total number of patients that were at life Esidimeni at the beginning of the project. And the data verification team went through close to 10,000 names from various data sets that were provided from my office, from Life Esidimeni, from social workers, from hospitals, including the Home Office, SASA, and others. So they went through that list to compile the total number of patients that were at Life Esidimeni. And we have come...
That would have been around around April, May 2015.
It would have been from the beginning of the project, would have been October. So how many people were at the beginning of the project when the project started?
I see.
And that number, for the record, is 1,711.
That's around October 2014, the number...
No,
2015.
2015.
The total number of people that were at Life Esidimeni was 1,711. That's where it starts. And 270 of these patients were discharged home. 270 were discharged home. Now, again, I want the media to report things as they are said rather than to report things as they are sensationalized. I really, that's why I'm going through this trouble. So 270 patients were discharged home, leaving us with 1,441.
I'm sorry, Professor. Which we're looking at the schedule on.
It will be page 3. It's just a summary of the results, really.
Let's go to page 3.
Page 3.
Is it page 3?
Results.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm trying to follow you as you say it. If you have a schedule at hand, it makes my life a little easier.
Okay. It will. Maybe I should just say on page 3 under results. I just want to summarize it because I don't want to confuse people with the details. So we're starting with 1,711.
Yes.
We discharged 270.
Yes.
We remain with 1,441. This is arithmetics and not maths. Now, then I'm requested to look into the circumstances of the death of mentally ill patients in Gauteng. As the ombuds, I do these investigations from October 2016 to February, the 1st of February 2017. And in that period, I find that there are 118 patients that died. And that figure has not changed. That is the terms of reference that I followed. 118 died during the period when I was investigating. Then I look at the terms of reference of the arbitration process that says I must then look at the death that occurred up to a month after the relocation process. So when I finished my investigations in February, patients were still in NGOs, some patients were in hospitals, but I had made a recommendation that all these patients must be removed from these unhealthy places or unprepared places back into safe places where they could be taken care of. So that process started after I had released my report on the 1st of February. And the process started from there and went up to the 31st of May. It was the process of relocating patients from unhealthy, unprepared, unlicensed NGOs back into high-quality healthcare places. And patients continued to die during that time. And then, after that, I would have to count from the 1st of June to the end of June, which is the month that is allocated as part of the arbitration.
Yes.
Now, what is the figure for that? The figure for that period of arbitration, it's 128 patients that died from life Esidimeni and 11 patients that died from the associated death that I've spoken about in my previous, bringing the total to 139. So
and those are items E and F. On
yeah, they will be on page 3. That would be H. Item H, where in total there will be 139 patients that have died as determined within the ADR arbitration terms of reference. Now, again, remember that whatever we count as life Esidimeni or as the project, there are always these 11 patients that were associated death that died at Siabadinga, Takalani, and even at Precious Angels. They were associated because they didn't originally come from life Esidimeni. They were either they belonged to the Kalinen Care Rehabilitation Center, but then had to sacrifice their lives in place of life Esidimeni.
That's the category that was displaced from CCRC, but were associated because they had to give way for those who had been moved from life Esidimeni.
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically, for the period of arbitration, the total number of deaths is 139. For the period of the ombud is 118. Now, remember that Dr. Kinoshi and his team have been monitoring patients, and we have monitored these patients up until the end of September. Now, by the end of September, or by the end of September,
which year?
2017, there had been 4 additional deaths, which brings the total to 143. Now, I want to talk about that because there is something that I actually want to share with the families and with the lawyers.
Before we get to that, then that means you must correct the reference to 1st September under I on page 3.
It's 30th of September.
Yes, 30 September.
Yeah, I think it must be corrected on the record. Then because I have provided you with a table of facilities and the number of deaths per facilities over the period, I have also given the final figures for some of the facilities that were identified. And I want to place that on the record that at CCRC, 29 patients had died. 29? And remember that CCRC is a complex that involves Anchor and Siabadinga and the Kalinen rehab. So there are 29 in total. And at Mosigo and Takalani, which are also a complex, although they are separate, they have the same director. One has got a license, the other one is running under the other one. There are 38 people that have died from Takalani in total. So they have now outstripped even Precious Angels, which had the highest number, which is still 20, and not 23, as I've had it on evidence. It is 20. And then there is Tsepong, which had 13 deaths at the end of what I was doing. In total...
I'm a bit confused by those numbers. I'm looking at a summary on page 3 under item A. Yes. Is that where I should look? Are those respective numbers? In other words, CRC, the numbers that follow,
yeah,
if you set out respectively, are they?
If you go, Chief Justice, if you go to this little table here.
Professor Mahoba, before you go there, let's go back to page 3.
Yes.
That is under the next column, a summary table of death per facility and period showed.
Yeah.
Are you making reference to that under A?
Yeah, it's under A.
Yes.
It's basically, it's a summary table of death per facility, yes, and the period that I've showed on page 3 under results.
The first number 29, you link it to CCRC.
Yeah, it's respectively. I left maybe the word respectively. It's 29 for CCRC, 38 for Mosigo and Takalani, and then 20 for Precious Angel, and 13 for Tsepong.
That's correct.
Those were the high density places where people died. So out of the 139 patients that died in my investigation, 100 of them had died from these 4 places.
Yes. And that's where the 72%.
It's 72%. But then if you were to add the 11, because they would have died at CCRC, it becomes 79.85. It's closer to 80.
Then
on B, I've just put a footnote that we must remember all the time that CCRC included the 2 unlicensed and poorly prepared NGOs, Anchor and Siabadinga.
Yes.
Okay? So that is the numbers.
Then your statistical analysis?
Now, the statistical analysis, as you remember, in my report,
you're going a little far. For details, we should then look at page 8 of the report.
Yeah.
It's a very vital thing. I'd like to make sure I get it right. So what you've summarized on page 3, A and B, in effect, the detail would be found on page 8. And the schedule that says total death per facility,
yes,
and period.
Yeah,
is it right?
It's provided there, yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perhaps you can finalize your explanation on or in relation to page 8.
I think in relation to page 8, as I said, I have just put in where patients died, the name of the facility at the top, and I have put the period from January 2016 up to the end of June, which would be the arbitration period. And I've put for each facility when patients died. So for example, you will see that for CCRC, nobody died in January 2016 up until June 2016. Now, all of you know that in June 2016, it was when the major migration was taking place and people were being transferred from Life Esidimeni into the CCRC. And the same pattern you can see for each of the facilities, that the death almost in numbers began to follow from June 2016. And that is what it shows there, and then it follows for each month up until June. For CCRC, for Mosego, for Precious Angels, for Tsepong, and so on and so on. The list goes on.
So according to that list, the first death occurred in January 2016.
Correct.
From Tsepong Care Center.
Yeah.
The numbers I don't understand are numbers like Life Waverley, well, late.
Those.
For instance, in April 2017.
Yeah, because people were now being moved back into places like Waverley, when the relocation process took people back into Baneng, which was part of Life Esidimeni, and Waverley. So they had to be counted because the period of arbitration says that we must go up until June.
Up until June, I understand that.
Yeah.
So they would have had a round trip, so to speak, to be moved out, go wherever else,
and then
escape death, and then come back to Baneng or Waverley.
Yes, that's correct. So that is that table there.
That's
and for the sake of clarity, again, I've divided it into the period of my terms of reference and then the period of the arbitration, where at the end of my period there were 118. It's there in green, and then at the end is the final tally, which is I don't know what color is this because I'm colorblind.
On page 9.
On page 9.
Yes.
It's 139 and it tallies. But as I say, it is really the facilities, death per facility per period over the time of the arbitration period. So you can go there and say, I want to see what happened in Waverley, I want to see what happened in Mosego over this particular month, and you can see how the deaths are clustering over a particular period.
And that is where you record at the top, total after the release of the Ombuds report, it's equals to 21.
Yeah. So after I released my report, up to the time when patients were relocated, 21 patients died. And if you then add them to the 118.
That's where 139 comes from.
Yes, that's where it comes from. That's all But I think the media must be very careful when they report. I think they must report the numbers and qualify them according to the period and the terms of reference, because otherwise the population gets confused and they think that somebody is hiding something. We are not hiding, but there is a time-dependent and terms of reference-dependent way of reporting.
Sure. Yeah. But you were quite clear from the beginning that you were still counting.
Well, yes, yeah. I was clear about that, and there was a reason for that, and I've explained it that at the time of my investigation, it was clear to me that information was coming in, and sometimes I was not being given information at the time when I was looking for it. And I also had evidence, but I hadn't verified it in the manner that would be satisfactory for me to actually pronounce it as authentic or something like that.
Yes. Well, let's put it this way, Professor Makhoba. When in the end 143 people die, I know there are different three stages. 118, an additional 21, and ultimately an additional 6, that gives you 143. Part of the horror is that you even have to reconcile these numbers in this complicated way, which gives an idea of just how many people have died. There are many bodies, aren't there?
Well, I think, yes, I think I would like to agree with that, Justice. I just think that this is like a moving train, and that's why I want the media to be very cautious, because, you know, people are coming out of the woodworks in different ways, and they appeal to different people. You know, I suspect that it may be that even after what I've said today, you may find that there are people who need to follow a different process in order, I think, to bring this. But that is really not within my gift and within my terms of reference. It is something that maybe the arbitration process needs to sit and discuss, because I followed a particular process with particular terms of reference, and there is a particular outcome, and I can stand at the rooftop and say, this is what I found from the information that I have that is authenticated. As I say, this data here comes from the Home Office. There was a name here that was actually raised by Section 27, where somebody's name was spelled as Lehwabe with a G. Now that's Bedi. Now if you spell it in Xhosa, you can put R and it becomes Lerwabe in Sotho, but it will be Lehwabe in Xhosa because their R's are pronounced as. But it was not only that, but even the dates of death were different. So you had two things that actually made it different. We had to go to the Home Office to ask, is there such a person in the Home Office register? But we also had to go back to the hospital and ask them, did you ever admit, who did you admit who died in your hospital? And this was at CCRC.
So the schedule that follows next,
yeah,
you're going to take us there sometime,
yeah,
right?
I'm going to do that.
Beyond the one that whose color you can identify.
Yeah.
You're going to tell us more about, okay, let's go there then.
Okay. Now, the final schedule, which is on page, there is a page which would be...
I'm sorry, just before you go away, Professor, of course, you won't be surprised when the media says the number is now 143.
Yes.
And that would be borne out by the different stages of counting that you have so ably done, and we're grateful for that. So clearly, you know, you're going to have to expect the media tomorrow to say, Professor Bakhoba says, no, in fact, there are now 143.
I expect them to qualify it, Judge. I really think we can't just bend in numbers around. I think the media must not only inform, it must educate.
Yes, but let's go to the schedules. Let's get back to the numbers. Yeah.
I think following that, there is a page which is just really a breakdown of the numbers, and I think I leave this to the arbitration team to argue about and so forth. It's not really for me to go through. It just spells out the numbers that I've already said there, and I don't think there's an issue around that. And then there is a schedule of the names. It's almost like a 5-page of the names of the 143 divided into 3 sections. Of the 128, which are the live Esidimeni patients that died in accordance with the terms of reference of the arbitration. And then there are 4 additional patients that are put in yellow that died almost towards September and after the period of arbitration. And then there are the constant 11 that have died as associated death covered on the last page. So that's really the table, and it's the details as far as I can see from what I have. I've given the total breakdown, and I've given the names, the list, where they died, and where they were admitted.
Professor, this is very impressive, but I mean, as far as you know, with the work you've done, the detail on this final schedule, the details are reliable. They are.
As I say, they've been verified by the data verification team in the Department of Health.
Yes.
They've been verified by my office. We have checked this, as I say, with the Home Office. I've done that myself, and I know that the Department of Health have done it independent of me. They have checked it through SASA. we have checked it through another team called the relocation team that was also monitoring these patients. And we have gone back, as I say, to the CEOs of the hospitals where these patients were. We have had to make some alterations here and there, but this is where we are. Now, there is a point that I also just want to clarify that I've just, and I'm speaking here as a doctor, for once, not as an ombudsman. When a patient comes to a hospital or is referred to a hospital, the patient belongs to a doctor or they belong to a clinic. Now, I say this because the patients we're dealing with here were patients that came from Life Esidimeni. And the decision was that the patients will either be discharged or they will go to a hospital, an institution hospital, or they would go to an NGO. Now, you will discover that when you look at the places of death, you will find that somebody will have died at Kalahari.
I see some adverse copies.
Yeah, no, adverse copies it's legitimate because that's where people were going to go. You just have to count it as a place where people needed to go. But nobody left Life Esidimeni to go to Kalahari because Kalahari does not treat long-term mental health. But somebody would have gone to Precious Angels, for example, and got sick there and then was requested to go to Kalahari. Now, in health, the place where you register is the place where you belong and you are treated through the system. So if you are treated and you die at Kalahari, or if you get better at Kalahari, you are going to go back to the NGO where you came from. You are not going to come out of Kalahari and be discharged because remember you are a long-term patient. You have a place that you are registered at. So the NGOs where they were registered would be the place where they belong if they had been treated at the hospital. So these things should not be confused, that you see somebody at Leratong Hospital and you suddenly think, oh, they belong to Leratong. They went to Leratong for a particular reason, maybe for an emergency, for something like that. If they got better, they would have gone to the NGO or the hospital to which they are now registered. And that's a tradition in the health system, that the place where you are registered tracks you around. You know, when I was in London, I would see people from Edinburgh, and they would be coming from Edinburgh, but when I finished with them, they go back to Edinburgh. They belong to Edinburgh. They don't belong to me. They came to me as a referral and so forth. So I just want people to be cautious about, you know, otherwise you'll have people all over the place and you don't appreciate it. It's a tracking system within the health system that is actually quite classic and traditional.
Professor, where the schedule is silent about the location of death, what assumption should I make? That they would have died at the facility registered at?
Yes, they would have died. I mean, there is one here that is actually unknown, and we have been struggling to find what is this unknown. And as I say, out of that whole list, obviously we have one that is unknown, and we have tried our best, and we have come back. The best way to register it is to leave it as unknown because we can't assign it.
But look at the location of death on the schedule. You'll see there are quite several where the location of death is unspecified. So my question is it legitimate to assume that it would have occurred at the facility?
At the facilities, yes. It is at the facilities, yes. That's a reasonable assumption to me, yeah.
Council?
Yes. Professor Makgoba, just to finalize on your report, let's go back to your statistical analysis.
As I indicated in my initial report here was that one of the problems we had was we had problems of records, registrations, and numbers, and therefore when we went to the Statistician General to say, can we analyze this to find significance, to do t-tests, statistical t-tests. He said, no, you can't do this because this whole thing shows such poor administration. There are no records, and you don't know whether you are comparing apples with sugarcane or oranges, whatever it is that you're doing. But basically, we couldn't do robust statistical analysis. And part of the reason why one of my first recommendations to the Gauteng department was to go back and say, let's try and find a way in which we can reconstruct, I think, the data from scratch and find out who were at Life Esidimeni when we started the project. And that's why we went through this data verification team using computers and going through about 10,000 records and names. In fact, at one stage or another, for the lighter side of it, I had patients who had 2 days of death, 28. Now, I know one thing about South Africa that they often did. One of the things they did, which is laughable in the world, is sometimes we confuse genders of babies when they are born. You know, you call them boys or girls. When they are girls, you call them whatever. So we are very good at mixing up things. But to have 2 days of death and you have 28 people, it shows you how corrupt the data was when we. So we had to go back again to the Home Office, to the various places, and say, what actually is the actual death? Nobody can die twice. And then we had people who had several IDs and so forth. I'm sure you have heard about that. So we've had to clean up this data to come to where it is right now. Yes. So now we're able to do statistical analysis.
And that is the result of the cleanup.
Yeah, this is part of the cleanup. And then now I just want to share with you the statistical analysis, because I think this just drives home some of the things that you may want to hear. First of all, we looked at the patients who died in 2016. That is from January 2016 to December 2016. The reason for that is that the Statistician General in the country compiles an age-adjusted record for the country that in 2016 from January to December, so many people died, and so many people die per 1,000, because that's how it is worked out. So the population, out of the population of South Africa, you have a number of people who died, but you have to calculate it per 1,000 of the general population. So in South Africa in 2016, for every 1,000, 8 people died. If we take the people who died from this transfer, there were 106 of them, and per 1,000, if you work it out and compute it, it was 63 per 1,000, which is 8 times. They were dying 8 times higher than the general population, which is very significant. Okay, that's the first point in the statistical analysis.
And the second point?
The second point is, if you then look at the observed death of this group that we're studying, and you compared that observed death with the general population, you came to something called a standard mortality ratio. And the standard mortality ratio that was able to be computed by statistician is 4.9. Now, how do you deal with this? We went through the literature and found that there were 203 studies that were done in 29 countries and in 6 continents, looking at the standard mortality ratio. And the average for the world is 2.2. So ours of 4.9 is very high. For this population that we studied in 2016 that died.
And is this the standardized mortality ratio of country or of the cohort?
Of the cohort that we studied for 2016 that came out of Life Esidimeni, comparing it with the international benchmarks of 203 studies in 29 countries.
I follow.
Yeah.
So that's a country code. It is Esidimeni, Life Esidimeni code. Yeah. Okay.
And then we did other studies statistically that showed that when you were transferred.
Just to get the point nailed there, this code was 4.9 compared to the international benchmark of 2.2.
2.2.
Okay, I've got that. Thank you.
Now we looked at the risk factors. So what were the risk factors for people to die? We found that there were three risk factors. If you were transferred to an NGO, you died faster and earlier than if you were transferred to a hospital. Okay? Now, let me put it in perspective. If you were to look at patients who were transferred and look at them at, say, at 92% of survival, 92% of the people who have survived, both at NGOs, and you ask yourself, how many days would they have survived for at the NGOs? It would be about 200 days. If you went to a hospital, about 98% would survive, and it would be for about 400 days. Not only did you die faster, you died earlier if you went to an NGO as opposed to if you went to a hospital. The other one was that if you were older, you died. It was significant. If you are male or female, although it was consistent to see that females were dying faster and earlier, it was not significantly different, but it was consistent that females died in the study. Now, there is a reason for that. If you then look at what I've said before, the females in this group were older than the males, so they fell into that risk, and proportionately, they were sent to the NGOs and not to the hospital. It was random, but that's what happened. So
you mean more females were sent to NGOs than males?
As a proportion.
As a proportion of that particular cohort.
Yeah. So, and it wasn't deliberate. It was just, it is what comes out, and it confirms what we had already said, that gender and NGOs versus hospital. So that is actually very significant also. So the final one on the statistical analysis is that if you had gone to an NGO, you had a 3.5 higher risk of dying than if you went to a hospital. Again, confirming that there was something that was not right about the NGO. Now that's really, as I say, this is not done by me, it's done by statisticians. So that is the next point I wanted to put. So if you were older, you were female, and you went to an NGO, the chances are that you had your survival is cut off, and the figures are there.
Yes.
Now,
on page 4, I think we have dealt with this earlier.
I've dealt with this before,
in your evidence,
but I want to emphasize it because it has got. We have spoken about this whole issue of people dying in the winter, and I just want to summarize it as follows: that this is nothing clever, but if you were to look at the history of life as Esidimeni and look at the history of the population in general, we know that there are more people dying in winter. So, as it happens by coincidence, the transfer of patients out of life as Esidimeni, the maximum transfer took place between the months of May and June. That was when the maximum happened. And that also coincides with the winter. So if you looked at the months of May, June, and July, and studied the number of patients who died in life as Esidimeni, and then you compared them with the number of patients in the same period who died in the facilities, and then you come back in 2017 when you have relocated them, and we've relocated them almost coincidentally around the same time, a very interesting picture emerges that over that peak period of 3 months, at life as Esidimeni, you had about 12.8 people dying per month, just between those 3 months. If you then went during the marathon project, 22 people died per month in that period. Okay? Then you take these people back to good quality care in the hospital, 2.7 people die. What does it tell you? Is that look after mentally ill patients properly, professionally, at the right places, nobody dies, or very few people die. So it's basically the best proof of the pudding, that if we had looked after these mentally ill patients, we wouldn't be sitting here. Now let me put it this way. In 2016, 103 patients died from January to December. In 2017, in 2016, 103 patients died. In 2017, now, it is the 10th of November, and we have only had 29 deaths from January to November. Now, this is again arithmetic and not actuary. If you subtract 29 from 106, we have lost about 76 or so patients that should not have died. That would have been here. I mean, as I say, if you do actuary, it may be less. But basically, as we see it right now, we have lost about 29 as compared to 106. And the difference is people we should not have lost.
Yes. And I see that, I think just explain, I think this would be important as well. Item 7 on page 5. Just explain that for the record.
I said that during this period of transfer, and especially these 3 months, and as I say, this is just a snapshot, a window, and it follows a number of coincidences that the transfer occurred in May, June, July, and life Esidimeni deaths were often maximum between May, June, and July, and then we did the relocation during May, June, and July, and you can measure that. It's just a snapshot, but it gives you something. That there was a 72% increase in death in the facilities during that period. And we also know that during this period, we closed about 6 of the NGOs. They were closed because people were dying there, and both the minister and the premier obviously were worried to prevent that we don't suffer more death by closing those NGOs and transferring them where? Back into the hospital. So, and then after that, we did what we didn't do before, which was to call experts to come and supervise the transfer into the hospital.
That is after the closure of this.
Yeah, after the closure of the NGOs and the relocation process, then we had the death decreased by 98.8. That's how significant it was. It just almost precipitously dropped.
So this will be the period after closure of the supervised relocation of patients back to
proper place. But all that it tells you is that if you look after mentally ill patients properly, professionally, and give them good care, they are able to live. And that is the message here, and as I said, the proof of the pudding. Now let me.
So this will be a contrast to what occurred when they relocated the patients from LE to the NGOs.
Yeah, and there is too many evidence here to suggest that our NGOs were, first of all, not prepared. They were not properly governed. I mean, they had other issues that you might have had here when you were sitting and listening, but there were lots of problems. But if you take mentally ill people and you put them and look after them professionally and well, they are able to live as they have done. Now, I just want to basically close up and conclude my thing, and this is where I suppose, Justice, I come to a little bit of poetry, but let me deal with the facts. First of all, we now know that to have maximum impacts on death in South Africa, we have to target the months of the winter, especially with these mental ill people, because either, they get out at night, they just stay outside, and they need to be properly looked at. We need to target those 3 months properly. And I think there's a story at Life Esidimeni that they did that. But for me, the most important message is that unnecessary death can not only be prevented, but can also be stopped through professional quality health care, as demonstrated by studies at Vescopis, as shown by the low death in hospital versus the NGOs, because there's professional care there, but as also shown by the dramatic decrease and the significant low death in hospital following the expert-guided relocation and professional care. It's all about professional care and where they are being looked after. For me, this is the clearest proof that these were not only unnecessary, but could also have been so easily prevented if we had given them the professional care that they deserved. And again, I repeat that the hospitals such as Vescopis, Sterkfontein, I think they did a wonderful job, I think, in looking after patients. So I now then have to come back and say, I use this quotation for what it's worth. And it comes from Shakespeare. It says, "Now is the winter of our discontent."
So there would have been nearly, what, 4.5 times deaths at NGOs than at Vescopis and Sterkfontein.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Made glorious summer by the son of York. This was coined by Shakespeare in 1594. But you know, the winter of our discontent obviously summarizes often a period in a country of unhappiness and so forth. And it's often also a time for philosophers and others to reflect and see what can we learn from the lessons of such disasters. And I think part of what's going on here is really to see whether out of this unhappiness and I think disaster that we've gone through, whether there's light at the end of the tunnel, as long as it doesn't hit you of this train. So I use that just to remind us that, you know, it's not the end of the world, but we are going through a very difficult time. Then I'm saying again, unnecessary and preventable death of mentally ill patients occurred in Gauteng as a consequence of reckless and negligent decision-making and actions. Now, in Lord Tennyson's poem, it says, somebody had blundered. Now, you must find out who had blundered, but you will deal with that. That's why you're having this process. But again, I want to emphasize...
Neither you nor me are poets or philosophers, Professor.
No.